Hello there, and welcome to All About Earth, where wonder takes a deep breath and science moves at the pace of imagination. Wherever you are, maybe the sun is just slipping down beyond your window, or maybe you're wrapped in the quiet of night. I'm glad you're here. Tonight, let's travel not into the cold, but into the warmth. Let's step into one of the strangest truths of our planet's history, that ice, those glittering poles we think of as eternal, is actually rare. For most of Earth's 4.5 billion years, the world has been ice-free. The frozen caps and glaciers we know today are just brief interludes, like a few cool minutes before dawn in a long, sunlit day of geological time. Imagine it, the Earth as a greenhouse, even a hothouse, the kind of warmth that would turn the poles into gardens. Picture Antarctica, not a white desert, but a jungle, a rainforest full of ferns and broadleaf trees, dripping with humidity. Imagine crocodiles basking in rivers, winding through the Arctic Circle, and palm trees leaning toward a midnight sun. Planet glowing with color and life, not shivering under frost. 90 million years ago, it really was like that. So was it 50 million years ago. Whole epochs when the world forgot what winter meant. Oceans were higher, climates gentle and wet, and the air carried more carbon than our modern lungs are used to. It was a time when the Earth breathed heat. It's almost funny, isn't it? We humans came along during a rare cold chapter, a time of ice sheets and snow peaks, and assumed this was normal. But in the grand story, the icy Earth is the exception, not the rule. The frozen poles are like the last few pages of a book that's mostly about warmth. So tonight, as you settle in, maybe pull the blanket a little closer, not because the story is cold, but because we're about to step into a world so warm it feels unreal. A world where winter was a rumor. A world that once was, and might one day come again. If you'd like to wander further with me into this greenhouse Earth, the forests of the poles, the oceans that shimmered with warmth, tap like, share your thoughts and subscribe. There's something beautiful about exploring a planet we thought we already knew, only to find it was once far stranger and far greener than we ever imagined. The Cretaceous, the dinosaurs' hot greenhouse. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the Earth without ice. Not just a summer without snow, but a planet that hasn't seen frost in millions of years. The Cretaceous Period, roughly 90 million years ago, was exactly that. A world turned to warmth, a greenhouse planet where jungles reached the poles and dinosaurs ruled not just the tropics, but the Arctic Circle. It was as if the entire planet had decided to turn the thermostat all the way up and never look back. The Cretaceous wasn't simply warm, it was lush, humid and teeming with life from the equator to the ends of the Earth. If you could step outside into that world, your first thought might be, why does everything feel like a sauna? Global temperatures averaged about 10 to 15 degrees Celsius higher than today. There were no polar ice caps. Sea levels were hundreds of feet higher, flooding entire continental interiors. Much of what we now call North America, Europe and Asia was underwater, scattered with shallow seas where giant marine reptiles like mosasaurs glided through warm, salty currents. The atmosphere carried more carbon dioxide than our modern skies, several times more in fact. And the result was a world wrapped in a constant damp heat. Even the poles, which now freeze under darkness half the year, were covered in dense forests buzzing with insects and rustling with leaves. It's funny to think that dinosaurs, the poster children of scorching deserts, actually spent part of their lives under the soft glow of midnight suns. But they did. Fossils from northern Alaska, Canada, and even Antarctica show that the Cretaceous poles were not barren wastelands, but forested landscapes, lush, swampy, alive. Hadrosaurs, those broad-beaked, duck-billed dinosaurs, and their horned neighbors, the ceratopsians, wandered through these forests like great reptilian moose. They munched on ferns and conifers under the dim gold of polar summer, then trudged southward, or huddled together when winter came and the light faded to twilight. Yes, winter still existed, but not in the way we know it. There was no snow crusting the ground, no frozen rivers. Instead, the Cretaceous poles saw months of mild darkness and months of never-ending daylight. Imagine standing among towering conifers as the sun rolls around the horizon, but never sets. The sky glows amber for weeks, shadows stretch and melt, and the air hums with the calls of creatures evolved to live where night and day have swapped their meaning. It's easy to picture a herd of hadrosaurs, their skin glistening with the damp of the forest, lifting their heads toward the horizon. No moon, no sunset, just the soft eternity of light. And yes, they really lived there. Their bones tell the story. At sites like Alaska's Prince Creek Formation, paleontologists have uncovered entire dinosaur communities, bones, nests, even footprints, preserved in what was once a high-latitude floodplain. These fossils show juveniles and adults together, suggesting that some species didn't migrate at all. Instead, they stayed put, enduring the long polar darkness and adapting to its rhythm. Their eyes were large, perfect for low light. Their metabolism may have run warm and steady, keeping them active even when the world dimmed. The Arctic wasn't a frozen desert. It was in its own way a paradise. If you'd wandered through those forests, you'd find a landscape far stranger than the icy poles of today. There were no grasses yet, no sweeping lawns or meadows, but there were cycads, ferns, and the early flowering plants that would one day give rise to oaks, lilies, and roses. The air would have smelled thick with resin and decay. The ground underfoot, soft with leaf litter, would squish with every step. Streams wound through the undergrowth carrying silt from faraway volcanoes, and towering above it all were trees like metasequoia, ancestors of redwoods, spreading their needle-laden arms to catch the endless sun. Fossilized wood and pollen from these plants still turn up in sediments from the high Cretaceous Arctic, proof that these forests were not just temporary oddities, but long-lived ecosystems, thriving under near-tropical conditions. You might meet a ceratopsian there, a great horned creature with a frill like a living crown, plodding through the moss in search of tender shoots. Its horns gleam slightly with sap where it's brushed past the trees. A few meters away, a group of hadrosaurs, perhaps Edmontosaurus, bend to feed, their bills sweeping the plants like living lawnmowers. They chew with hundreds of tiny teeth, grinding leaves into paste. Every so often, one lifts its head, steam curling from its nostrils in the cool morning air, and bellows softly. It sounds like a foghorn through the mist. Some scientists think these dinosaurs migrated south when the polar winter came, following the sun like enormous hungry birds. Others suspect they stayed year-round, slowing down during the months of darkness but never truly hibernating. Either way, it's clear they were adapted to extreme. Their bodies were robust, their bones dense, their senses keen, and they weren't alone. Smaller predators scurried through the underbrush, early relatives of mammals, darting like shadows between ferns. Feathered theropods prowled, their plumage insulating them against the cool polar nights. Insects buzzed thickly, and turtles basked in sunlit ponds that never froze. The Cretaceous world was full of surprises like that, contradictions that seem impossible, until you remember how dynamic the Earth can be. The North Slope of Alaska, now a place of tundra and permafrost, once supported ecosystems that could rival a subtropical swamp. Even Antarctica, the frozen giant of the modern world, was cloaked in forests and rivers. Fossil leaves and pollen grains from Cretaceous sediments there show that the climate was moist, temperate, and full of growth. Some layers even preserve the impressions of roots and tree trunks, evidence of a land where rainfall and warmth sustained entire forests near the South Pole. It's tempting to imagine the Cretaceous Earth as one long summer, but even this world had its rhythms. Seasonal changes in sunlight, rainfall, and plant growth shaped migrations and breeding cycles. Rivers flooded, then receded. Volcanoes dusted the air with ash. Storms rolled over inland seas, stirring the warm water like a simmering pot. In many ways, the Earth then was more alive than it had ever been. Plants were spreading into new forms, flowering species, diversifying, fruits and seeds evolving. Insects were adapting in turn, learning to sip nectar and pollinate. It was a kind of evolutionary arms race, wrapped in sunshine. And of course, the dinosaurs were everywhere. The Cretaceous was their high noon, the last great age before their sudden extinction. On land, in the air, and in the sea, they reached forms of size and diversity that are hard to comprehend. Sauropods, those impossibly long-necked giants, still roamed the continents, some stretching over 30 meters. Raptors darted between them, light and fast, their feathers catching the light like flame. Pterosaurs cruised overhead, wings cutting through the haze, while crocodiles lounged in steamy lagoons. Everywhere, life seemed excessive, overflowing, almost arrogant in its abundance. The climate had something to do with that. Warmth accelerates biology, plants grow faster, metabolism runs quicker, and ecosystems churn with energy. The Cretaceous greenhouse fed a feedback loop of vitality. More plants meant more herbivores meant more predators, and more waste meant richer soils for the next generation. The planet was, quite literally, composting itself into life. Even the oceans, though occasionally oxygen poor, were home to coral reefs, plankton blooms, and monstrous marine reptiles like the mosasaur, whose bite could shatter bone. If you could somehow fly above it all, say on the back of a friendly pterosaur, you'd see a planet almost unrecognizable. The continents were arranged differently. The Atlantic Ocean was still young, widening like a fresh scar between North America and Africa. India was an island on the move, racing northward toward Asia. Vast inland seas split the continents into patchwork archipelagos. From above, the earth would have looked greener, bluer, and somehow smaller, as if the high sea levels had softened its outlines. And yet, for all its strangeness, the Cretaceous was comfortable for life. The poles were mild, the tropics steamy but survivable. The climate was stable. No glacial cycles, no global freezes. In that sense, it was the planet's long exhale, a deep, humid breath before the abrupt chill of extinction. Even now, when scientists drill into ancient sediments and measure the ratios of oxygen isotopes, they find signatures of this warmth. The numbers tell a story the rocks can't speak aloud, a world in balance, but at a higher setting. It's easy to joke that the Cretaceous Earth was one big sauna, and in many ways it was. The air was thicker, the oceans warmer, and the nights longer. But imagine the sensory beauty of it. Rain tapping against giant leaves, mist curling between trunks, the call of a dinosaur echoing through the fog. The forests glowed green and gold under constant daylight, and even in the months of darkness, the ground stayed alive with roots and microbes. It was a planet in full bloom, every corner pulsing with heat and growth. And yet, beneath the humor, the idea of dinosaurs sunbathing under the midnight sun, there's something profound. The Cretaceous reminds us that the Earth has moods. It's been cold and silent, yes, but it's also been wild, hot, and overflowing. The ice we take for granted is only one face of a planet that's always changing. 90 million years ago, the world said, "Let there be warmth," and the dinosaurs answered, "Thank you very much." So if you ever find yourself on a cold night, shivering a little under the stars, remember this. Once, our world was a garden from pole to pole. Crocodiles swam where glaciers now stand. Hadrosaurs chewed leaves under the Arctic dawn. And the earth, drenched in sunlight, whispered softly through its forests. Eat while you can, there's plenty to go around. Maybe that's why the Cretaceous feels oddly comforting to imagine. It's the version of Earth that forgot how to freeze, that let life stretch and sprawl without boundaries. A reminder that warmth isn't just temperature, it's vitality, it's motion, it's the pulse of a planet alive. And somewhere, in those deep layers of fossilized soil, you can almost hear it, the slow, steady heartbeat of a world that once glowed green all the way to its poles. The Eocene, the crocodile greenhouse of the North. 50 million years ago, the Earth took a long, deep breath and decided to stay warm. The ice that once flirted with the poles was gone, melted into memory. The oceans swelled, the air thickened with moisture, and the world became a steam bath of life. This was the Eocene, the wet greenhouse age, when crocodiles paddled in Arctic rivers, turtles sunned themselves beneath polar skies, and forests stretched so far north that the map of climate itself seemed to have turned upside down. If you could stand on what is now Ellesmere Island, that lonely frozen outpost at the top of Canada where today the tundra scrapes by on moss and lichen, you would never guess its past. Back then, it was a paradise. The Eocene Arctic wasn't a barren expanse of snow. It was a swampy woodland, drenched in humidity, perfumed with rotting leaves, and alive with the sound of flowing water that never froze. There were no glaciers, no permafrost, no frost at all. The winters were long and dark, yes, but the rivers kept running, the soil stayed soft, and the crocodiles, yes, crocodiles lounged happily through it all. Let's pause on that image for a moment. Crocodiles in the Arctic. It sounds like a punchline, doesn't it? But it's true. Fossils tell the tale. Beautifully preserved skeletons of crocodiliforms, along with turtles, fish and early mammals, all found on Ellesmere Island. These were not lost tourists. They were permanent residents. The Arctic of the Eocene was warm enough even through months of darkness to sustain ecosystems that today belong thousands of kilometers to the south. When scientists first found these fossils, they had to double-check the dating. Crocodiles in the North Pole? Surely a mistake, but the rocks don't lie. And what rocks they are! Layers of sediment, packed with leaves, wood, and pollen from trees that once grew tall in those high latitudes. Fossilized broadleaf leaves still carry their fine veins perfectly outlined, like pressed flowers in the pages of deep time. They come from plants like dawn redwoods, magnolias, swamp cypresses, and palms. Palms! On Ellesmere Island, it's hard to imagine anything more absurdly tropical than that. Yet their remains are there, locked in shale, whispering of a time when the Arctic was green and soggy, not white and silent. The Eocene atmosphere was thick with greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide levels perhaps 4 to 6 times what we breathe now. That blanket of gas trapped heat and moisture, turning the entire planet into a vast, sweaty terrarium. Rain was common, humidity constant. Clouds drifted endlessly through the high latitudes, catching and reflecting sunlight, so that even during the long months of darkness, the world stayed relatively warm. It was a global sauna, and the polar regions, surprisingly, were among the coziest rooms in the house. Life responded with enthusiasm. Crocodiles swam in sluggish rivers, feeding on fish and whatever small mammals came too close to the edge. Turtles lumbered up the muddy banks to bask on driftwood, probably not realizing they were living just a few degrees from the top of the world. There were hippo-like herbivores, early mammals with hooved feet, adapted for the marsh, and little insect-eating primates that scampered among the trees. In the dense canopy above, birds sang or squawked. Evolution hadn't yet perfected the playlist. The air buzzed with mosquitoes the size of thumbnails, and dragonflies darted over pools thick with algae. It was not the Arctic, you know. Picture it instead as something closer to the Florida Everglades, but with 6 months of twilight instead of endless sunshine. The seasonal rhythm was strange. For half the year, the sun barely dipped below the horizon, and the forest glowed in a gentle, never-ending dusk. The other half, darkness fell and stayed. The trees lost their leaves and the world dimmed, but the rivers kept flowing, never freezing solid. Under the surface, turtles buried themselves in the mud, crocs drifted in slow motion, and mammals huddled together in burrows, waiting for the return of the light. How could they survive that? The trick wasn't temperature, it was adaptation. The Eocene animals didn't need ice, they needed endurance. Crocodiles are surprisingly hardy creatures. Modern ones can tolerate short bursts of cold, slowing their metabolism almost to hibernation. In the Eocene, their environment did the rest of the work for them. Even in the long dark, the temperatures stayed above freezing. The darkness might have been long, but the chill never bit. For them, it was more of a cozy nap than a struggle for life. Scientists have pieced together this picture using an unlikely source: mud, ancient river mud, and lakebed sediments still hold the traces of that lush ecosystem. Within them lie microscopic clues, pollen grains, bits of charcoal, tiny shells that act like time capsules of climate. The pollen reveals that broadleaf trees dominated, meaning winters were mild. The absence of frost rings in fossilized wood confirms it. Even the isotopes within the oxygen atoms of those sediments tell us that the water never froze. In short, the Eocene Arctic was a place where everything dripped, flowed, and grew. And what a sight it must have been. Imagine paddling through a slow, winding river under a canopy of giant trees. The air smells of peat and wet leaves. The light, even at midday, feels filtered, soft, golden, eternal. A rustle breaks the stillness as a small mammal darts across a fallen log, perhaps an early relative of modern tapirs or horses. From the shadows, a pair of crocodilian eyes break the water's surface, watching, Nearby, a turtle as wide as your desk slides into the stream with a splash. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolls not from a storm but from the grumbling of distant volcanoes, adding their breath to the already warm skies. In the grand story of Earth, the Eocene was a time of rebirth. The dinosaurs had been gone for 15 million years, wiped out by the catastrophe at the end of the Cretaceous, and the mammals had taken their place. But the mammals of the Eocene were not quite the ones we know. They were stranger, halfway between ancient and modern, hooved animals with long snouts, lemur-like primates with enormous eyes, and even whale ancestors that still walked on land. Evolution was in full creative mode, experimenting wildly, and the warm, wet climate gave it plenty of room to play. The Arctic, surprisingly, became one of its laboratories. The fossils from Ellesmere Island show a diversity of species that could rival any modern rainforest. They weren't identical to their tropical cousins, but they were close northern versions adapted to the light cycles, the soft soils, and the long, mild nights. This idea that the poles once served as greenhouses of evolution feels almost poetic. Life doesn't just survive, it explores, even in places that today seem impossible. Life once took root and flourished. And what about those plants? They tell their own story quietly, leaf by leaf. The broad leaves found in fossil beds suggest trees that needed abundant sunlight and moisture, yet tolerated long months without direct light. Their growth rings show steady, uninterrupted development. No frost damage, no winter dormancy. The forest simply slowed its breathing during the dark months, then exhaled into wild growth when the sun returned. The result was a living, breathing, year-round swamp at the top of the world. The rivers that flowed through this landscape were as constant as the heartbeat of the planet. Fed by rainfall and underground springs, they never froze. Instead, they wound lazily through peat-rich floodplains, carrying fallen leaves downstream to settle in layers that would one day turn to coal. Every drop of that ancient water was part of a global cycle of warmth, evaporation, condensation, rain, a planet-wide recycling system that kept the greenhouse humming. If the Eocene Earth had a personality, it would be that of a tropical vacation host, endlessly warm, slightly unpredictable, and definitely overbooked. Everything was growing too fast, evolving too quickly, competing for sunlight and space. Trees stretched higher, roots tangled deeper, and mammals diversified into shapes and sizes the world had never seen before. Even Antarctica, though we won't dwell on it here, was green. It was as if the planet itself had forgotten what winter was. And yet, despite the humor of it, crocodiles sunbathing under the midnight sun, turtles floating lazily beneath auroras, there's something awe-inspiring about the Eocene. It shows us how adaptable life can be, and how radically Earth's climate can shift. The Arctic, now a symbol of cold and deserts, was once one of the planet's richest ecosystems. To walk there today and imagine what once was is like standing in the ruins of a lost paradise. Beneath your boots lies the ghost of a jungle. If you were to dig into the permafrost of Ellesmere now, your shovel would strike layers of ancient soil, dark, crumbly, full of plant matter, fossilized peat from the Eocene swamps. In those layers are the imprints of leaves, delicate as lace, and sometimes the bones of creatures that lived among them. The evidence isn't subtle. It's a chorus of voices from deep time, all saying the same thing. We were here, we thrived. The world was warm. It's tempting, standing in the cold wind of the modern Arctic, to feel a kind of disbelief. How could this frozen land once have been home to crocodiles? But the Earth is not bound to our sense of normal. It has been through countless transformations, each stranger than the last. The Eocene was simply one of its more extravagant moods, a time when the thermostat was stuck on tropical and the poles became playgrounds for life. So if you could visit that world, would you? Step off the time machine into the humid twilight of an Arctic forest, breathe the thick, fragrant air, and listen to the quiet splash of reptiles, where today only ice cracks. Maybe you'd see a crocodile slip beneath the water, or a turtle blink lazily from its perch. Maybe you'd hear the call of an ancient bird echoing through the canopy. Just don't get too close to the riverbank. Those crocodiles still bite. The Eocene reminds us that Earth's climate isn't fixed. It's a pendulum, swinging between extremes, and every so often it lands on a moment of balance that feels almost magical, a time when even the top of the world could be warm enough for crocodiles to call home. If the Cretaceous was the Earth's furnace, then the Eocene was its sauna, steamy, verdant, and full of life luxuriating in its own warmth. It was a planet that whispered, not bundle up, but breathe deep, dive in, and swim. And somewhere, deep in the mud of Ellesmere, a fossil crocodile still grins, as if to say, see? I told you the water was nice. Definitions: icehouse, greenhouse, hothouse. If Earth were a person, it would have moods, long, dramatic, slow-moving moods that last millions of years. Sometimes it gets chilly and introspective. Sometimes it turns mild and balmy, and every once in a while it throws open every window in the cosmic house and decides that being hot is the new normal. Scientists, being the kind of people who like tidy names for complicated things, have given these moods official titles: Icehouse Earth, Greenhouse Earth, and Hothouse Earth. They're not weather forecasts. They're the great climatic identities our planet has worn again and again across its deep history. Right now, you and I are living in an icehouse. Don't be fooled by your air conditioner or your summer heat wave. On a planetary scale, this is the chilly version of Earth, the one where ice sits stubbornly on mountain tops and hunkers down at both poles, gleaming like mirrors pointed at the sun. That reflective quality, called albedo, is one of the key features of an icehouse world. Sunlight hits the bright white surfaces of snow and ice, and much of it bounces back into space, helping the planet stay cool. It's Earth's natural thermostat, except it's the kind that occasionally overcompensates and plunges the whole system into a full-blown ice age. During an icehouse phase, the poles are frozen year-round, and massive ice sheets can extend far beyond the Arctic and Antarctic circles. In extreme cases, like the snowball Earth events, hundreds of millions of years ago, glaciers may have reached all the way to the equator. Thankfully, our current icehouse isn't quite that ambitious. But the signs are there: Greenland and Antarctica covered in ice kilometers thick, mountain glaciers grinding down valleys, and cold ocean currents circulating between the poles and the tropics. Even the way sunlight reflects from the poles keeps global temperatures a little lower than they might otherwise be. It might sound miserable. Who wants a world with ice everywhere? But icehouse conditions are actually part of what makes our current climate livable. The temperature contrast between the equator and the poles drives winds, ocean currents, and weather patterns. The presence of permanent ice also locks away large amounts of water, keeping sea levels relatively stable, and the cooler global temperatures allow ecosystems like tundra, boreal forest, and alpine meadows to exist, habitats that would vanish in a warmer world. You can think of Icehouse Earth as a planet in a cool, steady rhythm, glaciers pulsing back and forth, seasons well-defined, the whole system breathing in sync with the slow heartbeat of the carbon cycle. Still, Icehouse Earth isn't constant. Within it, the planet slips in and out of glacial and interglacial phases, periods when the ice expands or retreats slightly depending on wobbles in Earth's orbit, shifts in ocean circulation, or the occasional geological surprise like a big volcanic eruption. We're in an interglacial right now, meaning the ice has backed off just a bit compared to the last peak of the Ice Age around 20,000 years ago. But geologically speaking, it's all the same chapter in the same cool book. The point is, the planet is cold enough to have polar ice, and that ice is shaping everything from climate to sea level to the color of the planet itself. Now imagine the thermostat turns up a few notches. The glaciers begin to shrink. The white caps fade, and the seas slowly rise. The air fills with moisture, clouds gather, and the world's edges soften into something warmer and wetter. This is Greenhouse Earth, a state where the poles are no longer icy deserts, but lush, temperate regions where winters are mild, and the difference between equator and pole is surprisingly small. The Earth becomes, in effect, one giant botanical garden. In a greenhouse world, the planet still has seasons, but they're gentler. The average global temperature is several degrees higher than in an icehouse, and there are no vast polar ice sheets to lock up water or bounce sunlight away. Without that icy mirror, more solar energy stays trapped in the system. The oceans expand, the air thickens with water vapor, and the result is a climate that's stable, warm, and persistently humid. It's like turning Earth into a vast greenhouse, where every corner stays comfortable for plants, and by extension for the animals that eat them. The classic example of a greenhouse Earth comes from around 50 million years ago during the Eocene. Back then, the Arctic looked more like a cypress swamp than a frozen desert. Crocodiles swam in rivers beneath auroras, turtles basked on the muddy banks of Ellesmere Island, and forests stretched to the very top of the planet. There were still cool seasons, but nothing froze solid. The poles were damp and dim, not dry and deadly. The atmosphere was loaded with carbon dioxide, probably 4 to 6 times today's concentration, and that greenhouse blanket kept the world cozy from pole to pole. Greenhouse Earth is a state of balance, tilted toward warmth. It doesn't mean everything is boiling. It means the planet's climate system has settled into a long-term pattern where warmth and humidity rule. The deep oceans are warm, the tropics lush, and the poles mild enough to host ecosystems we'd normally think of as subtropical. It's the kind of world that makes you want to kick off your shoes, sip something cold, and remark that the weather seems suspiciously nice. But that same warmth also reshapes coastlines and ecosystems. With no polar ice, sea levels rise, sometimes by 100 meters or more, drowning continental lowlands and creating shallow seas where deserts used to be. It's important to understand that greenhouse doesn't mean chaotic. The Earth in this mode is often remarkably stable. Temperature differences between equator and pole are smaller, which means fewer violent storms and jet stream wobbles. Weather patterns become slow and predictable. The problem, from a human perspective, is that the entire baseline shifts upward. What we'd call a heat wave today would be an average Tuesday in a greenhouse world. The Arctic might resemble modern southern Europe. London might feel like Miami. And yes, crocodiles might once again consider Canada a perfectly reasonable address. But what happens if the thermostat doesn't stop there? What if it keeps rising until the Earth starts to feel like a tropical spa that forgot to install an off switch? That's when you enter Hothouse Earth. This is the planet at its most exuberant, its most overcooked, and for some species, its most uncomfortable. A Hothouse state is defined by a total absence of ice. None at the poles, none on mountain tops, not even in the deep heart of winter. The atmosphere is thick with greenhouse gases, and global temperatures soar. During the Cretaceous, roughly 90 million years ago, Earth was in such a state. Imagine a world where the tropics stretched far into what's now the Arctic Circle, where palm trees grew on the coasts of Alaska, and forests of broadleaf trees shaded dinosaurs that never saw snow. Average global temperatures were perhaps 10 to 15 degrees Celsius higher than today, and the difference between equator and pole was small enough that even high latitudes felt subtropical. Oceans were so warm that they shimmered with blooms of plankton and supported marine reptiles the size of buses. A Hothouse Earth doesn't just feel hot, it is structurally different. The oceans are higher, not just because of melted ice, but because warm water expands. The atmosphere holds more water vapor, which amplifies the greenhouse effect even further. Clouds become thicker and more widespread, trapping heat below like a global duvet. Rainfall patterns shift. Deserts shrink in some areas but expand in others, depending on how air circulates. The whole climate system becomes intensely energetic, fueled by heat that's constantly trying to even itself out. If you could travel back to a Hothouse Earth, you'd probably notice the color of the planet before anything else. The poles would be green, not white. The seas would be a deeper blue-green from all the algae. The continents would wear a lush, sweaty sheen of vegetation, except in the deepest interiors, where the heat dried things out completely. Every horizon would shimmer. It would feel like walking through the breath of the planet itself. For life, a Hothouse world isn't necessarily a death sentence. It's just a very different playing field. In the Cretaceous, for example, life didn't just survive, it thrived. Dinosaurs dominated every continent. Birds diversified. Flowering plants spread across the globe. Insects swarmed. And reefs flourished in warm seas. It was a world of abundance, though not one where humans or even primates would have been particularly comfortable. Nights would be warm and heavy, the air thick with humidity, and the rainfall often torrential. The phrase "sweat of the earth" would no longer be a metaphor. To compare these three moods, Icehouse, Greenhouse, and Hothouse, is to see how sensitive the planet really is. The differences between them are driven mostly by atmospheric carbon dioxide and feedback loops involving ice, water vapor, and sunlight. Add CO2 and the Earth warms, melting ice and lowering albedo, which causes even more warming. Remove CO2 and the planet cools, ice spreads, and more sunlight bounces away. It's a slow dance of physics and chemistry, but the choreography is relentless. In an ice house, the feedback loops work in reverse. Expanding ice reflects more sunlight, cooling things further. The oceans absorb more carbon, lowering greenhouse gases, and the planet drifts deeper into chill. In a greenhouse, the feedbacks mellow out. There's less ice to amplify cooling, so warmth dominates. But the system finds a new equilibrium. In a hothouse, the feedbacks go all in for heat. Little or no ice, high humidity, and oceans acting more as energy reservoirs than regulators. The Earth doesn't burn up, but it glows with the energy of a system running near its upper comfortable limit. From space, you could tell them apart instantly. An icehouse Earth gleams with white poles and patchy clouds. A greenhouse Earth looks softer, greener, the poles tinted grey-green instead of brilliant white. A hothouse Earth glows with an almost uniform color, blue, green, tan, its clouds thicker, its air wetter, its light slightly golden from all the moisture suspended within. Each one is beautiful, in its own way, a different aesthetic of balance and energy. And while the terms sound extreme, these transitions happen naturally over millions of years. Earth's orbit, continental drift, volcanic activity, and biological evolution all play roles in shifting the climate from one mode to another. When continents cluster near the poles, ice can form more easily, helping an icehouse take hold. When they drift toward the equator and volcanoes release massive amounts of carbon, a greenhouse or hothouse follows. Over geological time, Earth has oscillated between these modes like a slow cosmic metronome, each swing carving a new chapter in the story of life. It's worth noting that icehouse, greenhouse, and hothouse aren't moral judgments. They're descriptions. Earth doesn't prefer one over the other. It simply responds to the energy it receives and the gases that trap it. To the planet, a hothouse is no better or worse than an icehouse. It's just a different tune in the long symphony of climate. To us, of course, it feels more personal. We've built our civilization inside an icehouse's interglacial lull, and our bodies, crops, and coastlines are tuned to its particular rhythm. If the planet were to slip toward a greenhouse again, it wouldn't be the first time, but it would certainly get our attention. There's a kind of humor in how simple the categories sound, considering how complex the science is. Icehouse, greenhouse, hothouse. It's almost like describing 3 different vacation packages. Come visit Icehouse Earth. Crisp air, sparkling glaciers, and reliable ski season. Try Greenhouse Earth, mild winters, lush forests, crocodiles, optional. Or for the bold traveler, Hothouse Earth, sun, surf, and no ice anywhere ever. The truth, of course, is that the planet doesn't sell tickets. It just cycles through these states according to physics, chemistry, and time. Still, there's something oddly comforting in knowing that Earth has worn all these faces before and will again. Icehouse, greenhouse, hothouse. They're not disasters, they're identities, each sustained by feedbacks that balance energy in their own way. We just happen to be living in one of the cooler ones. The glaciers might seem eternal to us, but in geological time they're fleeting decorations. Someday, given enough warmth and time, the planet will shrug them off again, revealing an older, greener self beneath. So, if you ever find yourself gazing at the white shimmer of polar ice on a globe or satellite image, remember that brightness is only one of Earth's moods. Long ago, the same planet blushed green all the way to the poles, and even longer ago, it burned in tropical hues from equator to horizon. The icehouse reflects, the greenhouse breathes, the hothouse glows. Together, they make up the rhythm of a world that never stops changing. And if Earth could speak, maybe it would say, "Don't worry. I've been hot before. I've been cold before. This is just who I am." The question, of course, is which mood you'd prefer to live in. Icehouse Earth with its crisp stability, greenhouse Earth with its warm, gentle rains and leafy poles, or hothouse Earth blazing and abundant, a planet turned all the way up. Choose wisely. The thermostat has a long memory. Evidence, the rainforests of Antarctica. It's hard to picture now, isn't it? Antarctica, The name itself sounds like the definition of frozen, a place of endless ice, howling winds, and air so dry it crackles in your lungs. The coldest, whitest, loneliest continent on Earth. Yet if we could step through time, say, about 90 million years ago during the Cretaceous, or even 50 million during the Eocene, we'd find a different world entirely. No ice, no snow, just green, deep, endless, wet, humming green. Back then, Antarctica wasn't a continent of silence. It was a jungle, a rainforest, so dense and alive that you could hear it before you saw it. The trill of insects, the chatter of amphibians, the rustle of vast leaves. Warm, wet air hung heavy with the smell of mud and pollen. Trees rose like columns in a temple, their trunks thick and knotted, their crowns stitched together into a living roof that filtered sunlight into shifting patterns of gold and shadow. This isn't poetic exaggeration. The rocks tell us plainly, Antarctica was once a rainforest, and the proof, though frozen now, is everywhere. Fossilized trees, seams of ancient coal, pollen grains trapped in stone, even the impressions of insect wings. All these silent witnesses point to a time when the southernmost continent was not a frozen tomb, but one of the planet's greenest lungs. Let's start with the trees. In certain parts of Antarctica, especially along its coastlines, researchers have uncovered the petrified remains of forests that once covered the land in thick, unbroken canopies. These aren't scraggly shrubs clinging to survival. They're full-grown giants, some over a meter wide, still rooted in place, their growth rings frozen mid-sentence. You can stand among them, even now in the Transantarctic Mountains or on Seymour Island, and see the shapes of trunks and roots emerging from the rock. They look like sculptures carved from marble, but they're real trees that once drank rainwater and reached toward a sun that never truly set. These fossil forests date from both the Cretaceous and the Eocene, two of Earth's great greenhouse eras. During those times, the atmosphere was rich in carbon dioxide, and the world's average temperature was far higher than today. The poles, instead of being icy deserts, were warm and humid. The Antarctic region sat farther south than it does now, but continental drift hadn't yet fully locked it over the pole, and ocean currents flowed freely around it, carrying warmth. It was the perfect recipe for a rainforest: moist air, long growing seasons, and constant twilight in summer that let plants photosynthesize almost around the clock. Imagine that, month of daylight without night, when the sun circled the horizon like a lazy lantern. For plants, it must have felt like an invitation to grow, grow, grow. But there was a catch. 6 months later, the light would vanish. The same forests that basked in eternal sun would be plunged in a near-total darkness for half the year. Somehow, life adapted. The fossil evidence shows that many trees in these Antarctic forests developed unusual features to cope with the extreme light cycle. Some dropped their leaves during the dark months, conserving energy like deciduous trees in temperate zones today. Others, like the southern beech, Nothovagus, and the podocarps, a kind of conifer, may have slowed their metabolism, entering a quiet, living pause until the sun returned. Growth rings in the fossilized wood show rhythmic patterns, periods of fast expansion followed by sudden stillness. Each ring is a tiny heartbeat of survival, in a land that alternated between endless day and endless night. Among those forests were swamps and wetlands thick with ferns, mosses, and flowering plants. These marshy lowlands eventually became the coal seams that scientists find buried deep beneath the ice today. Coal is, after all, just compressed plant matter, dead vegetation that accumulated faster than it could decay. That means the environment was not only lush, but perpetually wet. The carbon-rich mud of ancient Antarctica tells us there were rivers, floodplains, and stagnant pools where vegetation piled up year after year. The air would have been humid, perhaps misty, with clouds of mosquitoes and the steady hum of dragonflies tracing the air above the water. Speaking of dragonflies, yes, even they were there, alongside beetles, ants, and other insects whose delicate fossils have been found preserved in fine sediments. Their presence is a quiet, but powerful clue. Insects are picky about climate. They thrive in warmth and moisture, not ice. The variety of insect fossils discovered on the ancient Antarctic coastlines reveals a thriving ecosystem of pollination and decay, the intricate, buzzing machinery of a rainforest. Some specimens show the broad-veined wings of dragonflies. Others preserve beetle shells so detailed that their ridges and punctures still catch the light under a microscope. These tiny time travelers remind us that the ancient Antarctic air once vibrated with life. And then there's the pollen, those microscopic golden grains that plants send out like bottled messages on the wind. In sediment cores drilled deep below the ice, scientists have found layers of pollen from tropical and subtropical species, palms, ferns, flowering trees, even in places near the South Pole, where sunlight now barely touches the horizon. The pollen tells the same story, warm, wet, and bursting with growth. Some grains belong to families of plants that today live in rainforests of New Zealand or South America. That makes sense, because back then, Antarctica was still connected to those continents, forming part of the ancient supercontinent Gondwana. The flora and fauna could spread easily across what are now oceans. If you could walk through an Antarctic rainforest of that time, it would feel strangely familiar and alien all at once. You'd hear the constant drip of water, the hiss of insects, the distant croak of amphibians. The ground would be soft, almost spongy, covered in ferns and fallen leaves. The trees, giant conifers, cycads, and early flowering species would rise into a perpetual half-light. In the Cretaceous you might see magnolia-like blossoms and fern fronds, the size of umbrellas. In the Eocene, palms and warm climate beaches would dominate. Vines and epiphytes would drape from the branches. It would be quite literally a polar jungle, and what a strange rhythm of life it must have had. During the endless summer, the forest would hum with energy, plants photosynthesizing 24 hours a day, insects in a frenzy of feeding and breeding. Then, as the months of darkness approached, the activity would slow. Trees would drop their leaves into the swamps. The forest would go quiet, not dead but dreaming. Beneath the thick blanket of decomposing matter, seeds and roots waited patiently for the return of life. When the sun finally rose again, the forest would awaken in a rush, buds bursting, spores releasing, and the air thick with the smell of green life. The geological record captures these rhythms in a language of layers. Thick bands of coal, interspersed with siltstone and sandstone, mark cycles of flooding, decay, and regrowth. Volcanic ash layers show that even amid this lushness, Argentec was restless. Its surface cracked and rumbled, and ash from distant eruptions sometimes fell like grey snow over the jungle canopy. Fossil leaves pressed flat in mudstone still bear the shapes of broad lobed edges and smooth veins. Some even show tiny holes from insect bites, proof that something once chewed them, lived off them, and contributed to the endless recycling of carbon and light. It's almost comical to think that beneath today's glaciers, miles-thick walls of ice, there lie the remnants of swamps and trees. When scientists drilled into the seafloor near Antarctica's coast in 2019, they pulled up sediment cores filled with fossilized roots and pollen, dating back about 90 million years. The discovery stunned them. The samples were unmistakably from a rainforest environment. The soil chemistry, the pollen types, the microfossils, it all lined up with a world that would have felt more like New Guinea than the South Pole. Antarctica, it seems, once pulsed with the kind of life we now associate with equatorial jungles. And yet, the real wonder isn't just that it was warm, but that it stayed that way. Despite the long polar nights, the forest endured. They didn't need constant sunshine, they needed stability. The high carbon dioxide levels kept the planet's heat well distributed. Ocean currents carried warmth deep into the southern latitudes, and the thick atmosphere acted like a blanket, preventing the winter chill from biting too deep. Even the soil played its part. Rich, dark, full of decaying organic matter that trapped moisture and nutrients. Antarctica wasn't surviving in spite of the darkness. It was thriving because of its balance with it. Picture this. A rain shower begins in the Antarctic summer. Drops of warm water patter on leaves the size of dinner plates. Steam rises from the forest floor. Somewhere, a dragonfly lands on a leaf, shaking tiny droplets from its wings. A beetle the size of your thumb digs into damp bark. A tree fern unfurls another coil of green. Above it all, the light filters down in shifting golden ribbons. No snow, no frost, just the rhythm of rain and growth. It's the kind of scene that makes you wonder how much the world can change and still be the same planet. When we think of rainforests today, we imagine the Amazon, Borneo, or the Congo, humid belts of green clinging to the equator, but Earth has never been fixed in its patterns. The Antarctic rainforest reminds us that climate zones wander, that the planet's face is a living, breathing thing, warmth and cold, light and dark. They're just phases in a long conversation between the sun, the air, and the sea. Antarctica's fossil forests are the punctuation marks of that dialogue, frozen in stone but still eloquent. There's a gentle humour in it, too. We think of Antarctica as the ultimate no-entry zone for life. And yet beneath its ice lies the proof that it once said the opposite. Grow, thrive, climb high. The coal seams are the compost of those ancient days, the stored breath of trees that once exhaled oxygen into a world of crocodiles, turtles and birds. The pollen, trapped for eons, still glows under microscopes like tiny specks of gold. Even the insects, preserved in delicate impressions, seem to laugh at the idea that this continent was ever dead. Of course, nothing lasts forever. The climate shifted, continents drifted, and Antarctica finally slid fully over the South Pole. Ocean currents reorganized, isolating it from global warmth. Ice began to accumulate, slowly at first, then with unstoppable momentum. The forests withered, the swamps froze, and the insects vanished. Layer by layer, the green was buried under white. But the fossils remain, like photographs of a forgotten season. So the next time you see an image of Antarctica, vast, barren, and white, remember what lies beneath. Under those kilometers of ice sleeps a rainforest, its roots turned to stone, its leaves pressed flat in time. The coal beneath your feet, the black rock that once burned in engines and hearths, might well be the condensed ghosts of Antarctic trees that drank from swamp water and stretched toward a midnight sun. Antarctica, the frozen heart of Earth, was once its beating green lung, a land of rain, not snow, of beetles and dragonflies, not penguins and seals, of warmth that wrapped the world like a tropical blanket. The fossils tell the truth. Our coldest continent was once hot with life, and if the Earth could whisper through its ancient layers, perhaps it would say, "Yes, I've worn white for a while now, but once I dressed in green." Evidence. The swamps and crocodiles of the Arctic. If someone told you there were crocodiles in the Arctic, you'd probably laugh or at least raise an eyebrow and assume they'd been watching too many nature documentaries on Fast Forward. But time has its own sense of humour, and Earth is the greatest prankster of all, because once upon a time there really were crocodiles in the Arctic. Not the frozen, silent Arctic we know today, but one from 50 million years ago, the Eocene epoch, when the top of the world was not a wasteland of ice, but a warm, humid paradise of swamps, rivers, and forests. Imagine the Arctic, not in white and grey, but in every shade of green. Picture a landscape covered in broadleaf trees, their canopies forming living cathedrals that caught the endless summer light. Beneath them ran wide rivers that never froze, winding through wetlands thick with reeds and moss. The air was warm, damp, and fragrant with the smell of fresh growth. Now add the sound of splashing water, the soft thud of something large sliding off a muddy bank. There, among the roots of cypress-like trees, a crocodile glides past, its eyes just above the surface, perfectly at home in a place that now spends half the year in darkness. This isn't fantasy, it's science. Fossils from Ellesmere Island, one of the northernmost bits of land on the planet, have revealed that during the Eocene it was home to an ecosystem that looked and felt more like Florida than the Arctic Circle. Scientists have unearthed the bones of crocodiles, turtles, early mammals, and fish, all preserved in sediments that once formed the beds of ancient rivers and swamps. Even fossil leaves, broad, lush, unmistakably temperate, have been found, pressed flat in layers of fine mudstone. The discovery is one of those delightful geological contradictions. Crocodiles where the midnight sun never sets, and where today even moss struggles to survive. Let's linger there for a moment. Ellesmere Island, now a frozen desert of rock, ice and silence, was once alive with the pulse of water. During the Eocene around 50 million years ago, global temperatures were several degrees higher than today, and the poles were ice-free. The Arctic Ocean was more like a warm inland sea, its surface covered by floating vegetation and its shores lined with forests. The climate was subtropical, warm enough for crocodiles to thrive, but not so hot that it scorched the land. How do we know? Because the rocks remember. Deep in the layers of ancient sediments, scientists have found the remains of not one but several species that couldn't possibly live in cold conditions. Crocodiles, for instance, are ectothermic. They depend on external warmth to regulate their body temperature. They cannot survive in freezing climates, and certainly not in places where winter brings months of darkness. Yet there they were, leaving behind teeth, vertebrae, and even the delicate impressions of their scaly skin. These were not visitors carried north by accident. They were residents. The Arctic was their home. Nearby, paleontologists discovered fossilized shells of freshwater turtles. Like crocodiles, turtles cannot tolerate sustained cold. Their presence alone confirms that the Arctic rivers of the Eocene never froze solid. Not even during the long, dark winter months. The water stayed liquid, the air mild. Seasonal changes existed, yes, but they were gentle, like the difference between a cool and warm breeze. Snow was probably rare, if it fell at all. Instead, the land breathed in slow cycles of light and shadow, green and gold, with life adapting to both. And the trees, oh, the trees! Fossilized leaves from the region tell a story of a forest rich in diversity and texture. There were alders, birches, and dawn redwoods alongside broadleaf species like the ancient relatives of oaks and maples. These trees formed dense canopies over the swamps, their roots tangled in peat-rich soil. The leaves show no sign of frost damage. Instead, their growth rings reveal steady, uninterrupted development, punctuated only by seasonal pauses when the light dimmed. Some trees shed their leaves during the months of darkness, while others simply slowed their metabolism, waiting patiently for the sun's return. It was a forest that didn't just survive the polar cycle, it thrived in it. Walk through that forest, and you'd find yourself in a world both familiar and strange. The air would feel heavy, thick with moisture, and the buzz of insects. Dragonflies skimmed over pools, beetles crawled along the bark of trees, and small mammals scurried through the underbrush. You might see a turtle basking on a fallen log, or hear the soft grunt of a crocodile drifting in the current. Early mammals lived there too, small, furry, quick-eyed creatures that foraged for food among the roots and leaves. They were the distant ancestors of today's deer, horses, and primates, still small enough to slip away when the crocodiles stirred. It's hard to reconcile this image with the Ellesmere of today, where temperatures drop to -40 and the sun disappears for months. But that's precisely what makes the discovery so haunting. For half the year, even in the Eocene, the Arctic was cloaked in darkness. The sun dipped below the horizon for weeks, then months, leaving the land in a dim twilight lit only by stars and auroras. Yet the rivers still flowed, the crocodiles still swam, and the trees still grew. The ecosystem had adapted perfectly to a rhythm that seems impossible to modernize. Scientists have tried to imagine how those crocodiles managed it. Being cold-blooded, they would have relied on the lingering warmth of the water and the insulating power of their swampy environment. Perhaps they burrowed into the mud during the darker months, slowing their metabolism much like modern alligators do in chilly winters. The river systems of ancient Ellesmere likely never dropped below Tendril Sea, warm enough to keep them alive and active. The surrounding forest canopy, dense with vegetation, would have trapped heat and humidity, creating a self-sustaining microclimate, like a greenhouse within a greenhouse. The evidence for this warm Arctic world comes not just from bones and leaves, but from chemistry, the invisible fingerprints left by ancient air and water. Scientists studying oxygen isotopes in fossilized turtle shells and tooth enamel found that the ratios matched those from modern subtropical climates. That means the average annual temperature on Ellesmere Island during the Eocene hovered around 13 degrees C, with summer highs near 20 degrees C and winter lows that rarely touched freezing. Compare that to today's average of -20. It's as if someone swapped the poles for the tropics. And still, the most enchanting part is imagining what it felt like to be there. The Eocene Arctic would have been wrapped in fog for much of the year, the air thick with mist rising from warm rivers. The endless summer sun would cast long, soft light through the canopy, making the forest glow in shades of amber and green. Then, as winter approached, the sunlight would fade, replaced by a golden dusk that lingered for weeks before giving way to darkness. The forest wouldn't go silent entirely. Life would slow, but not stop. Beneath the mud, crocodiles would drift into stillness. Turtles would nestle into the sediment. Mammals would curl up at burrows. The rivers, alive with motion, would murmur softly through the dark months, carrying leaves and silt to the ancient Arctic Sea. Everywhere there would be signs of adaptation. The plants themselves seemed tuned to the rhythm of light and dark, rather than heat and cold. Some had broad, waxy leaves to capture as much light as possible during the long summer. Others grew tall and slender, competing for every ray of the low-hanging sun. The forests were evergreen and deciduous at once, a blend of persistence and patience. When the light returned, the entire landscape would awaken as if from a dream, buds swelling, insects hatching, and crocodiles stirring from the depths. It's tempting to think of this world as fragile, but it was remarkably stable. For millions of years, the Eocene Arctic maintained its warm, humid climate. The balance came from a combination of high atmospheric carbon dioxide, altered ocean currents, and the absence of reflective ice. Without ice to bounce sunlight back into space, the region absorbed heat efficiently. The oceans circulated warmth from the equator to the poles, creating a uniform temperature gradient. The Arctic, in short, was cozy. The fossils on Ellesmere tell us all this with astonishing clarity. The bones of crocodiles and turtles speak of warmth and water. The leaves of broadleaf trees speak of humidity and long growing seasons. Even the sediments themselves, rich with organic carbon, show that the land was alive and fertile. It wasn't a brief anomaly, it was an entire chapter in Earth's climatic story. Standing on Ellesmere today, it's almost impossible to connect those dots. The ground is locked in permafrost. The rivers freeze solid, and the wind howls through valleys once shaded by trees. But the rocks beneath your boots remember. In their layers are the imprints of leaves, the shells of turtles, and the teeth of crocodiles, proof that warmth once ruled here. You can almost hear the ghosts of that world whispering beneath the ice, murmuring through the ancient mud. It was green once. It was alive. And what a strange, beautiful irony that is. The Arctic, now the symbol of cold and stillness, was once a swamp that never froze, filled with creatures that basked beneath the midnight sun. It reminds us that Earth's identity is fluid, not fixed. Ice can melt, forests can bloom, and the poles themselves can trade their colors. Climate, in the grand scheme, is a storyteller with a long memory and a mischievous sense of balance. If you were to visit the Eocene Arctic, you might think you'd stumbled into a dream. Warm winds off the sea would carry the scent of damp soil and flowering plants. Dragonflies would hum in the air, their wings flashing like glass. A rustle in the reeds might reveal a turtle sliding into the water, followed by the faint ripple of something larger. The crocodile, silent and ancient, its eyes catching the dim light. You'd stand there halfway between day and night, between tropic and pole, and realize that this world, this impossible beautiful swamp, was real. And maybe, if you listened closely, you'd hear the river itself speaking, its voice soft but steady. Don't be fooled by the dark. The water is warm. Swift evidence. The dinosaurs of the Arctic. It sounds like the setup for a bad joke. What do you get when you cross a duck-billed dinosaur, a horned giant, and a midnight sun? The answer, believe it or not, is the Arctic. 90 million years ago. Yes, dinosaurs once lived there, not fossil tourists swept north by accident, but full-time residents of a world that, in the Cretaceous, was green, warm, and strangely inviting. The top of the planet, now a land of ice and silence, was once home to forests, rivers, and herds of dinosaurs that chewed, stomped, and thundered under a sun that sometimes refused to set. To picture this properly, you have to let go of the modern Arctic. Forget the snow, the permafrost, the endless white. Imagine instead a vast landscape of lush, mixed forests, conifers, ferns, and the first flowering plants carpeting the lowlands. Rivers cut through valleys, lined with tall trees, and wetlands shimmered with ferns and moss. The air was mild, the ground soft with fallen leaves. It wasn't tropical, but it was far from frozen, more like a cool, misty, temperate forest, perhaps similar to modern-day British Columbia or southern Alaska in summer. But here's the twist. This was the North Pole, and roaming through these polar forests were dinosaurs. Real, living dinosaurs, going about their business as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Hadrosaurs, those broad-billed, plant-munching, duck-billed giants, travelled in herds through the conifer glades. Ceratopsians, their horned and frilled cousins, trudged behind, heads held high like armoured knights. They lived, bred, and grazed in a place that today spends half the year in darkness. Fossils from Alaska's Prince Creek Formation and Canada's North Slope have confirmed this story in exquisite detail. Paleontologists have uncovered thousands of bones, teeth, and tracks belonging to these polar dinosaurs. There are juvenile skeletons, proof that they weren't just migrating through, but actually raising their young there. Some species were unique to the high latitudes, adapted to the strange rhythm of Arctic life. The presence of nesting sites tells us something profound. These creatures called the polar forests home. So what did that home look like? The evidence points to a mixed forest, dense stands of conifers like dawn redwoods and ginkgos, with pockets of ferns and flowering plants growing in the underbrush. Seasonal floods created wide plains of mud and silt where vegetation thrived, and the constant daylight of summer drove rapid plant growth. Imagine a hadrosaur standing in the half-glow of a 2 a.m. sun, tearing mouthfuls of fern leaves from a patch that never sees night. To them, this wasn't strange, it was simply dinner time. Hadrosaurs were the lawnmowers of the late Cretaceous, equipped with hundreds of tiny teeth packed together into grinding batteries that could strip and mash tough vegetation. A single herd could clear entire groves of undergrowth, their broad snouts sweeping like harvest machines. In the Arctic, that skill came in handy. The growing season was short but intense, and when the plants bloomed, they did so in abundance. The hadrosaurs took advantage of the burst, feeding almost constantly, bulking up for the darker months ahead. Then there were the ceratopsians, the horned dinosaurs, distant cousins of Triceratops. They were heavier, slower, and far more dramatic, with massive skull frills and sharp horns curving from their faces like living sculpture. Imagine a group of them moving through the fog, their breath steaming in the cool morning air, horns catching the amber light. They too were plant eaters, using their beak-like mouths to clip vegetation and their frills, perhaps for display or temperature regulation. If hadrosaurs were the grazers of the Arctic forests, the ceratopsians were its walking fortresses. For a long time, scientists believed these dinosaurs must have migrated. After all, how could cold-blooded reptiles survive in a land that spent half the year without sunlight? The idea was that they traveled south in winter, following the sun and the vegetation. But then came the evidence that upended that neat assumption: baby dinosaurs, fossilized hatchlings, still small and delicate, discovered in layers that could only have formed at high latitudes. If these dinosaurs had migrated, their young would have been too small to make the journey. The only logical conclusion was that they stayed year-round. Staying meant adapting, and adapt they did. Some scientists think Arctic dinosaurs may have been warm-blooded, or at least partially endothermic, able to regulate their internal temperature like modern birds and mammals. Others suggest they had insulating feathers or dense layers of fat. Whatever the case, they found ways to cope with the long, dim winters and the strange light cycles. The hadrosaurs' large eyes, for instance, might have helped them see in low light, while ceratopsians' massive bodies could have retained heat efficiently. The Arctic wasn't frigid during the Cretaceous, but it wasn't tropical either. Winter temperatures could dip near freezing, and snow might have fallen occasionally. The rivers, though, didn't freeze solid. Instead, they meandered through landscapes that changed color with the seasons, green and gold in summer, dark and skeletal in the endless dusk of winter. The dinosaurs likely changed their behavior too, moving between river valleys and forested uplands, depending on food availability. Some herds may have migrated short distances, following the greenery like modern caribou. Others might have relied on stored body fat or a slower metabolism during the lean months. The forest itself was alive with clues to their world. Fossil leaves found alongside the bones show a rich mix of deciduous and evergreen trees, the kind of vegetation that could support large herbivores. Fern spores and pollen trapped in sediment layers tell of warm, wet summers and mild winters. It was a climate where plants never quite stopped growing, even in the dim light of winter. In that perpetual twilight, herds of hadrosaurs may have stood silently among the trees, their breath steaming, waiting for the return of the sun. There's something almost cinematic about the idea of giant dinosaurs walking beneath a midnight sun. In summer, daylight lasted for months. The sun rolled around the horizon, but never set, casting a constant amber glow that made the forests shimmer. The hadrosaurs grazed endlessly, their footsteps soft in the moss. Ceratopsians clashed horns in slow, echoing battles that broke the stillness of the long day. Predators, perhaps smaller tyrannosaurs or dromaeosaurs, prowled the edges, their calls carrying through the mist. Then came the flip side, the long night. For months, the sun disappeared below the horizon, leaving only starlight and the flicker of the aurora. The forest stood silent, except for the murmur of unfrozen rivers. Yet life went on. The dinosaurs didn't vanish, they simply changed their pace. Maybe the herds huddled together for warmth. Maybe they fed on bark or evergreen needles. Maybe, like some modern animals of the far north, they slowed their activity, conserving energy until the dawn returned. The fossils paint this picture, not with brushstrokes, but with the fine detail of bones and sediment. In the layers of the Prince Creek Formation, paleontologists have identified the remains of at least a dozen species of Arctic dinosaurs, from herbivores to small predators. There are traces of footprints preserved in ancient mud, three-toed impressions leading across what was once a riverbank. There are teeth worn smooth by grinding, and bones showing growth patterns that suggest year-round activity. It's as if the Earth itself kept a diary, and we're just now learning to read its handwriting. One of the most striking discoveries came from the analysis of growth rings in dinosaur bones. Like trees, bones grow in layers that record the pace of life. Fast growth in abundance, slower in hardship. The Arctic dinosaurs' bones show seasonal rhythms but no long pauses or frost damage. That means they didn't hibernate. They grew, fed, and moved all year long. Even through the polar melt, they were alive and active, enduring and adapting to a world that defied expectations. It's easy to imagine them now, a herd of hadrosaurs, their skin dappled with the green shadows of the forest, wading through a shallow river that gleams with reflected light. One dips its broad snout to drink, ripples spreading across the surface. Nearby, a ceratopsian lowers its massive head, horns glinting like polished ivory, and pushes aside ferns to reach the tender shoots beneath. The air is filled with the quiet drone of insects, the rustle of leaves, and the soft splash of heavy feet in water. Overhead, the sun hovers low but eternal, painting the world in gold. There's humor in the contrast too. The thought of dinosaurs trudging through the Arctic sounds absurd until you remember how flexible life really is. The Earth has never been static. It shifts, tilts, and experiments. When conditions changed, the dinosaurs didn't complain. They adjusted. The hadrosaurs became Arctic lawnmowers. The ceratopsians turned their horns toward the northern lights, and the world, for millions of years, let them thrive. Eventually, of course, the warmth faded. The Cretaceous came to an end, and with it the dinosaurs themselves. The forests died back, the climate cooled, and the Arctic drifted toward the icy solitude we know today, but the fossils remain. A record carved in stone of a time when the poles were not frozen deserts, but living, breathing ecosystems. They tell us that the Arctic was once a cradle of life, a place where giant animals walked under golden skies and fed on forests that never truly slept. Even now, when paleontologists kneel on the gravel and brush away the dust from a bone, they're uncovering not just fossils but forgotten possibilities. Each discovery adds another note to the strange, haunting music of Earth's history. The Arctic has always been a place of extremes, endless light and endless dark, freezing cold and ancient warmth. The dinosaurs, it seems, knew how to dance between them. If you close your eyes, you can almost see it. The trees sway in a soft, humid breeze. The air hums with life. A line of hadrosaurs moves slowly through the undergrowth, their tails sweeping rhythmically. A group of ceratopsians follows, horns rising like banners in the mist. The sun circles above, refusing to set. Somewhere deep in the forest, a predator's cry echoes. The sound fades and the forest returns to its gentle rustling. For a moment, the Arctic is not a wasteland of ice, but a living, breathing world again. Green, humid, and full of giants. And the earth, as if amused by our surprise, seems to whisper through the ages, yes, even here life once feasted. Geographic changes, the high seas of the ancient earth. Close your eyes and picture the world, but not as you know it. Forget the ice caps, the polar frost, the neat outlines of continents we memorize from maps. Imagine instead an earth drowned in warmth, its oceans swollen and sprawling, its coastlines redrawn in sweeping curves of blue. The year is not a year at all, but an epoch, a time when sea level stood 60 or 70 meters higher than today. Cities like London, New York, and Shanghai would be deep underwater. But there were no cities then, only forest jungles and vast inland seas that shimmered under a golden sun. The planet had, quite literally, gone swimming. High sea levels aren't just about melting ice, they're also about heat. Warm water expands. It takes up more space. So when the Earth slips into one of its greenhouse moods, the oceans rise for two reasons. First, the polar ice sheets vanish, releasing trillions of tons of water into the seas. And second, the seawater itself swells as it warms. The result is a world where the ocean grows restless and ambitious, creeping over the edges of continents, turning valleys into bays and mountains into islands. During the warmer stretches of the Cretaceous and Eocene, the Earth's waterline climbed astonishingly high by modern standards, about 70 meters above today's. That doesn't sound like much until you realize it's enough to drown entire nations. To the planet, though, it was a comfortable fit, a natural adjustment in its long, slow breathing cycle. To life, it was an invitation. The continents, newly fragmented and soaked, became mosaics of islands, lagoons and shallow seas teeming with creatures. It was a water world, but a warm, friendly one. Take North America, for instance. In the middle of the Cretaceous, it looked less like a continent and more like two enormous peninsulas leaning away from each other across a vast inland sea. From what's now the Gulf of Mexico, warm salt water stretched northward, across the Great Plains, through what we now call Kansas, Nebraska, and the Dakotas, all the way to the Arctic Ocean. This was the Western Interior Seaway, a warm, shallow body of water nearly 3,000 kilometers long and up to 1,000 kilometers wide, splitting North America in two. On one side lay Laramedia, the long strip of land that would one day become the western United States and Canada, crumpled by mountain ranges forming along the coast. On the other side lay Appalachia, a quieter, flatter region that covered what's now the eastern United States. Between them stretched a blue highway of life. Imagine a sea shimmering under a hazy sky, its surface dotted with islands, coral reefs, and the occasional ripple from something very large, swimming just beneath. It was a paradise for marine reptiles, mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, and other creatures that seemed part fish, part nightmare. Above them, pterosaurs glided between the shores, while ammonites spiraled lazily through the depths below. Along the coasts, forests leaned toward the water, their roots brushing the salty shallows, the air full of wet vegetation and sea spray. Inland, rivers poured into this great basin, carrying mud and plant debris that would one day become the sedimentary rocks we now find packed with fossils. If you were to sail through the Western Interior Seaway, you'd find that it wasn't deep, not an abyssal ocean, but more of an enormous sunlit lagoon. Most of it was less than a few hundred meters deep, clear enough that sunlight could reach the bottom. The seafloor was covered in silt and seagrass, alive with invertebrates and fish. Imagine an ocean where the tide rolls through what's now Montana, and where the horizon is dotted with the silhouettes of palm trees on distant islands. It's hard to imagine a more peaceful vision of prehistoric Earth, though. Admittedly, you'd want to stay clear of anything with too many teeth. Europe, too, wore a very different face. With no ice to trap water at the poles, the seas rose and flowed across low-lying plains, turning much of the continent into a sprawling archipelago. What we think of today as France, Germany, and Poland were a patchwork of islands separated by shallow seas. The Alps hadn't fully risen yet. Much of southern Europe was underwater. The Mediterranean region was more of an inland sea that merged with the Tethys Ocean, the warm, life-filled waterway that once stretched from Spain to Southeast Asia. Imagine traveling across Eocene Europe. Instead of a single solid continent, you'd hop from island to island, each one lush with vegetation and humming with life. Palms grew along the coasts. Swamps filled the interiors. Turtles, birds, and early mammals made their homes in this island world. It wasn't quite the tropics, but it was warm, humid, and gentle. A place where the land and sea blurred into one. You could have sailed from what is now London to Berlin without ever losing sight of shore. Europe was, quite literally, in pieces, but those pieces were green and thriving. And then there was Africa. Today, the Sahara is a vast, parched desert stretching across the top of the continent. But in the warm epochs of the past, it was something entirely different. A shallow sea. When sea levels rose 70 meters higher, the low basins of North Africa filled with water, creating a massive inland sea that shimmered where dunes now roll. It wasn't deep, perhaps, only a few dozen meters, but it spread for thousands of kilometers. The edges of the sea were lined with mangroves and mudflats, the perfect breeding ground for fish, crustaceans, and early marine mammals. The Sahara, that emblem of desolation, was once a giant tropical bay. If you could stand on the edge of that ancient African sea, you'd see a horizon of shimmering blue stretching as far as the eye could reach. The air would be heavy with moisture, thick with the scent of salt and vegetation. Flamingo-like birds might stalk the shallows, fish would flash beneath the surface, and crocodiles would lurk in the estuaries. Inland, the landscape would rise into green plateaus dotted with rivers and forests. What is now sand and silence was once alive with water and sound. Asia, too, looked different. Much of modern China and Southeast Asia lay beneath shallow seas, while the Himalayas had only just begun their long, slow climb toward the sky. India, still drifting north after splitting from Africa, was surrounded by warm waters that teemed with life. Australia, farther south, was smaller and wetter, its interior still partially submerged. The global map was not a set of sharp boundaries between land and sea, but a watercolor of transitions, estuaries, lagoons, deltas, and bays. Even the polar regions were not spared the ocean's advance. With no ice caps to hold them back, the seas lapped high onto what we now call the Arctic coastlines. Greenland was green indeed, forested, humid, and surrounded by shallow water. The poles, far from being the coldest corners of the earth, were gateways to warmth, cradled by the expanded ocean that wrapped around the planet like a shimmering sunlit ribbon. This high sea world had its own rhythms. Tides swept over vast plains, leaving behind nutrient-rich mud that fueled explosions of life. Coral reefs flourished far from the equator, stretching across the new continental shelves. Sea level was so high that even small changes in the volume of the oceans could flood or expose entire regions, creating new habitats overnight. Where we now have deserts, there were once bays. Where we now find mountains, there were reefs. The planet was sculpted by water, not by ice. If you could fly above that world, the difference would be breathtaking. The continents would look smaller, their edges blurred. The outlines of North America and Europe would be ghostly, half-drowned shapes. The world would look more ocean than land, blue and green, swirled together like paint on a wet canvas. The air would be thick with humidity, the clouds larger and slower, the storms softer but longer lasting. Rain would fall often, feeding rivers that spilled back into the swollen seas, and beneath those seas, life flourished. The shallow marine environments created by high sea levels were ecological treasure troves. Sunlight reached the seabed, fueling photosynthesis and filling the waters with plankton, algae, and coral. Fish and marine reptiles hunted through the reefs, while ammonites drifted in lazy spirals. Every coastline was alive. The distinction between land and ocean was blurred, each one feeding the other in a cycle of abundance. From a geological perspective, these flooded ages tell us something profound about the planet's flexibility. The Earth's surface isn't fixed, it breathes. When ice builds up, the oceans shrink and continents grow. When the ice melts, the seas rise and swallow them back. The land we stand on now has been drowned and revealed countless times, each pulse of sea level reshaping ecosystems, climates, and the course of evolution itself. What we call high sea level is simply Earth in one of its warmer, more extroverted moods. It's tempting to think of this high water world as chaotic, but it was in many ways serene. The climate was stable, the temperatures uniform, and the oceans warm from pole to pole. There were no glaciers to drive abrupt changes, no ice ages to whiplash ecosystems. The continents floated in their sunlit shallows like lazy guests at a summer pool party. Earth wasn't gasping or drowning, it was basking. Of course, to us, that world would feel unrecognizable. Most of our modern landmarks would be gone, replaced by shimmering expanses of water. The Mississippi River would flow directly into the western interior seaway, forming a massive estuary stretching into what's now Canada. London and Paris would be seabed neighbors. The Sahara would be a shallow bay, and the Mediterranean a vast inland lake. It would be a planet of islands and archipelagos, more sea than land, a place where the horizon was always blue. And yet, life thrived. The high seas didn't destroy the world, they reshaped it. Forests grew along new coastlines, reefs expanded, and species evolved to fill the endless shallow habitats. The rising oceans were not disasters, they were invitations. Evolution, it seems, loves a good flood. So when we think of those ancient times, those epochs when the water reached high and the continents shrank, it's worth remembering that Earth was not suffering, it was experimenting. Warmth made the oceans wander, and the wandering seas made the world more alive. The western interior seaway, the islanded Europe, the drowned Sahara, they were all chapters in a single long story of water, warmth, and time. And if Earth could speak, it might say, with a ripple of amusement, "Don't worry, I've been higher before." Because for the planet, high sea levels aren't a crisis, they're just a change of wardrobe. Once the continents wore crowns of green and robes of blue, their edges hidden under the tides. The world shimmered, glowed, and swayed to the rhythm of the rising sea. It was a time when the earth, unburdened by ice, leaned back, stretched out, and said softly to itself, "Flood the land, there's still room." Geographic changes, ocean currents and polar reefs. If Earth had a heartbeat, you could feel it pulsing through the oceans. The planet's true circulation system is not made of veins and arteries, but of water, vast, sweeping currents that carry warmth and life across the face of the globe. They are the invisible architects of climate, the unseen artists that paint temperature across the planet. And during the warm ages of Earth's past, those glorious greenhouse and hothouse eras, these currents flowed differently. The seas were not just warm near the equator, they were warm everywhere, even at the poles. The world's thermostat had been turned up, and the oceans became a giant, planet-sized hot tub. It's easy to forget that ocean currents are, quite literally, the engines of the climate. They move heat, moisture, and nutrients from one place to another, smoothing out temperature extremes. In our icehouse Earth, cold water sinks at the poles and warm water rises near the equator, creating a circulation pattern that keeps the tropics wet and the poles icy. But in the warmer chapters of Earth's history, say the Cretaceous or the Eocene, the whole system worked differently. With no ice caps to chill the water, the deep ocean warmed and the circulation slowed. Instead of cold, dense currents plunging into the abyss, the oceans mixed more gently, spreading warmth evenly from the equator to the poles. The result was astonishing. Oceans that stayed balmy from top to bottom, poles that never froze, and coastlines that teemed with coral reefs far beyond their modern tropical limits. It was as if the planet had taken the tropical ocean and poured it over the entire globe. Imagine the map of the world, but with the temperature gradient flattened. The equator is of course hot, but not that much hotter than the poles. The seas shimmer in a nearly uniform warmth. Ocean currents, freed from the icy barriers that today deflect and twist them, flow smoothly and widely. The Atlantic and Pacific are connected by shallower seaways. Water from the tropics slides north and south without interruption, carrying both heat and nutrients. If you could drop a bottle into the ocean near the equator, it might over decades drift all the way to the poles without ever passing through cold water. The Earth's circulation had become a global embrace. In such a world, coral reefs didn't stop at the equator. They flourished nearly everywhere shallow sunlight could reach. Fossil reefs have been found in places that today are buried under snow or permafrost. Alaska, Norway, even parts of the Arctic and Antarctic shelves. These were not the sterile, frozen seabeds we know now, but living cities of calcium and color. Picture a reef growing under a midnight sun near what would one day become Greenland. The water is clear, tinged turquoise and gold. Fish weave between coral towers. Crinoids, those feathery marine animals that look like underwater flowers, sway gently in the current. Mollusks, sponges, and early reef-building algae crowd together in a maze of living architecture. Above the water, coastal forests rise, their roots tangling with mangroves at the shoreline. The scene feels tropical, but the latitude is nearly polar. The only reason it works is that the oceans, like generous couriers, have carried warmth all the way there. Ocean currents are subtle but powerful. They shape where life thrives, where rain falls, and even where continents wear away. In those ancient hothouse oceans, surface currents flowed not just along the equator, but in great, sweeping gyres that reached the pole. The deep ocean was warmer, denser, and slower, like honey instead of water. That meant nutrients circulated differently. Instead of strong upwellings, cold, nutrient-rich water surging to the surface, there was a more gentle turnover. The ocean was calmer, but it was also fertile in unexpected places. Coral reefs, for instance, depend on stable, warm, shallow waters. The ancient currents created precisely those conditions on a planetary scale. The reefs themselves were masterpieces. Unlike the coral of today, which is limited mostly to tropical latitudes between about 30° north and south, these prehistoric reefs extended far beyond. Fossil evidence shows reef-building corals and sponges living as far north as Alaska and as far south as what's now Patagonia. Their skeletons, preserved in limestone, record an ocean that was not divided by temperature, but unified by warmth. It's almost poetic to think of it. Coral gardens growing where, today, icebergs drift. The planet's own paradox, a polar sea alive with color. Scientists studying these fossil reefs find chemical signatures that confirm just how mild the waters were. Oxygen isotope ratios, locked in the ancient coral skeletons, show temperatures hovering around 15 to 20 degrees, even at high latitudes. In modern terms, that's more like the Mediterranean than the Arctic. This warmth didn't just support coral, it powered ecosystems. Reefs are biodiversity engines, homes for fish, crustaceans, worms, mollusks, and countless microscopic creatures. They form the foundation of marine food webs. In the ancient oceans, their reach was global. A fish swimming along the continental shelf could have found continuous reef habitat stretching for thousands of kilometers, from what is now Mexico to Alaska, or from North Africa to northern Europe. The seas must have shimmered with life, schools of fish glittering like silver ribbons, predatory marine reptiles weaving through the maze, sea turtles resting in the coral shadows. But perhaps the most fascinating part of this story is how the currents themselves maintained that equilibrium. Without cold polar sinks, the oceans mixed primarily through wind and surface flow. Warm water from the equator drifted toward the poles, releasing heat into the air. That heat kept the poles mild and the atmosphere moist. Then the slightly cooler water sank, not icy cold, just denser from evaporation, and drifted back toward the equator. It was a slower, gentler loop, but it kept the planet in balance. The Earth during these times wasn't chaotic, it was lazy. The deep ocean was sluggish, the surface calm, the whole system humming along at a low, even tempo. It's tempting to imagine it as a world without storms, but that's not quite right. There were storms, of course, massive tropical ones that rolled over warm seas, but they were evenly spread, their energy dissipated by the planet's uniform warmth. There were no brutal cold fronts, no icy blasts from the poles. The climate, like the currents, was steady and indulgent, and what a gift that was for the reefs. Coral, as delicate as it seems, loves consistency. It thrives when temperatures stay warm, but not scorching, when waters are clear and nutrient poor, and when sunlight reaches deep. The ancient oceans provided all three. Volcanic islands dotted the seas, their flanks offering perfect foundations for reefs to colonize. Carbon dioxide levels were high, but so was photosynthesis, thanks to the lush plant and algae life in the shallow waters. The reefs expanded like slow-motion fireworks, branching, fusing, and spreading across the continent's drowned edges. If you could swim through one of these ancient polar reefs, it would feel both familiar and alien. The corals would look different from the ones we know today, thicker, denser, built by species long extinct. But the structure, the pattern of life, would be instantly recognizable. Schools of fish darting between coral heads, bright sponges filtering the water, tiny crustaceans hiding in crevices. It was the same vibrant, noisy neighborhood we associate with tropical reefs today, except that here, tropical, stretched nearly to the poles. The fossil record captures this in exquisite detail. Limestone outcrops in places like Svalbard, northern Canada, and Siberia preserve the remains of coral colonies that once thrived in high-latitude waters. Each coral skeleton is a snapshot, a pulse of growth frozen in time. When geologists slice these rocks open, they find banded structures that record seasonal rhythms, much like tree rings. In some layers, the growth is nearly continuous, suggesting years with little variation in temperature or sunlight. That kind of stability could only exist in a world where ocean currents smoothed out the climate from one end of the globe to the other. It's easy to think of ocean currents as mere mechanics, but they are storytellers too. They carry memories, traces of temperature, salinity, and chemistry that record how the planet once felt. In the ancient warm oceans, their story was one of generosity. They didn't guard heat jealously at the equator. They shared it freely. The poles, instead of being cold storage, were extensions of the tropics. The oceans were not divided, but continuous, a single, immense circulatory system nourishing every corner of the earth. There's a certain humor in imagining coral reefs thriving near the poles. Today we treat coral as fragile, tropical creatures, the kind that blanch at the slightest chill. But in those ancient seas, they were pioneers, spreading across latitudes with the confidence of explorers who knew no limits. It's as if the earth itself had whispered, "Grow where you will, the water's fine." Of course, this oceanic paradise was not eternal. As the continents drifted and the climate cooled, the currents began to change. Land masses moved into new positions, blocking or redirecting the global flow. The poles grew colder, the deep waters denser, and the gentle mixing gave way to the modern conveyor belt of cold and warm. The coral reefs retreated toward the equator, their polar cousins left behind as fossils, silent, stony echoes of a warmer world. But for millions of years they flourished, proof that life can bloom even where we least expect it. If we could travel back and drift above those polar reefs, we'd see something miraculous. Beneath us, fields of coral stretching to the horizon, fish flashing silver and gold in the clear water, the hum of life filling the ocean like music. The sunlight would linger almost all day, glancing off the waves in endless summer, and the currents, invisible but powerful, would murmur beneath it all, a slow, steady pulse, the heartbeat of a living planet. Ocean currents don't just move water, they move possibility. They decide where warmth goes, where storms form, where reefs grow. In the great warm epochs of Earth's history, they wove the world into a seamless whole. A planet without temperature extremes, without icy barriers, without division between tropical and polar. They turn the Earth into a single breathing organism. So next time you look at a map and see the blue of the oceans, remember, that blue isn't still. It's moving endlessly. It has always been moving. It once carried warmth to the poles and built coral cathedrals beneath midnight suns. And if you listen closely, if you imagine the deep, slow rhythm of the water, you might just hear it whisper, as it did in the ancient seas. Flow on, grow on. The ocean remembers the fragility of ice, the world we stand on. If you listen closely enough, you can almost hear it, the soft, imperceptible sigh of melting. It's the sound of ice loosening its ancient grip, of frozen water remembering how to flow. Across the poles, from the white crown of Greenland to the silent expanse of Antarctica, the earth is thawing, slowly yet far faster than the rhythms that nature once kept. It's a delicate sound, a whisper beneath the wind, but it carries the weight of ocean. At this very moment, the ice sheets that cap our world hold an almost unimaginable quantity of water. Greenland alone contains enough frozen mass to raise global sea levels by about 7 meters. If it were to melt completely, Antarctica, that sleeping giant at the bottom of the world, holds roughly 10 times more, enough to lift the oceans by more than 60 meters. Together, these frozen continents are the guardians of the shoreline, the keepers of balance between land and sea, and they are beginning to stir. The Arctic, especially, is changing with a speed that startles even the most seasoned scientists. It is warming nearly 4 times faster than the global average, a phenomenon known as Arctic amplification. This means that while the planet as a whole grows warmer by fractions of a degree, the far north races ahead, shedding its cold identity in real time. Ice that once took millennia to form now vanishes in decades. Rivers that once froze solid every winter now run freely year-round. The Arctic, it seems, has remembered its Eocene self, warm, green, alive, but it's doing so in fast forward. The reasons are beautifully simple and frighteningly efficient. Ice is reflective. It bounces sunlight back into space, helping to cool the planet. But as it melts, it reveals darker surfaces beneath. Open ocean, wet soil, rock. These absorb sunlight instead of reflecting it, trapping heat and accelerating the melt. It's a feedback loop, an amplifying echo. The more the ice retreats, the faster the world warms, and the faster the world warms, the less ice remains. It's as if the planet, once wrapped in a white coat, has decided to unbutton it. In Greenland, the change is written across the landscape in rivers of blue. Each summer, meltwater streams carve their way through the ice sheet, forming turquoise lakes that glimmer like jewels against the white. Some plunge deep into the glacier, disappearing into vertical shafts called moorlands, natural drains that funnel water down to the base of the ice. There it lubricates the interface between ice and rock, allowing the glacier to slide a little faster toward the sea. From above it looks serene, almost beautiful, but every drop that flows downward is another step in a long retreat. Antarctica's transformation is slower, quieter, but no less dramatic. Its vast ice shelves, floating tongues that extend from the continent into the ocean, are cracking and thinning. Some, like the Larsen and Thwaites glaciers, have begun to crumble at their edges, sending towering slabs of ice drifting into the Southern Ocean. Scientists call Thwaites the Doomsday Glacier, though that name feels unfairly theatrical for something so patient. It isn't exploding, it's exhaling. The glacier's meltwater seeps into the sea like a message from the deep past, reminding us that ice, no matter how eternal it seems, has always been temporary. If you were to stand at the edge of Greenland's melting plain, the air would hum with water. The ice isn't just melting, it's alive with sound. Trickles merge into rivulets, rivulets into torrents, until the glacier sings its strange summer song of melt and motion. Each droplet carries history, ancient snowflakes compressed over centuries, now set free. It's both mesmerizing and melancholy. The ice has begun to tell its final story, one drop at a time. The thaw reaches deeper than the eye can see. Across the Arctic Circle, vast areas of permafrost, the frozen soil that has locked away water, carbon and the remains of ancient ecosystems for tens of thousands of years, are beginning to soften. As it thaws, it releases moisture, gases, and even the preserved remnants of long-dead plants and animals. The ground buckles and sags as the frozen foundations give way. Lakes form where once there were hills, forests tilt as their roots lose purchase in the thawing earth. In some places you can see the land itself breathing, rising and falling as ice beneath it melts and refreezes like a sleeping giant, shifting in its dreams. And the trees are following. Forests are creeping northward, colonizing ground that was once locked in frost. Shrubs push into tundra, moss carpets, new soil. Birds follow the greenery. Insects follow the birds. The Arctic, long defined by stillness and scarcity, is becoming noisy again. Alive with wings, with growth, with change. It's a strange echo of the Eocene, when forests reached the very edge of the world. But unlike that ancient warmth, this one is coming too quickly. Evolution moves in centuries, not seasons. The trees may arrive, but not all the creatures built for ice can move with them. Still, there's a kind of wonder in the transformation. To see tundra turn to meadow, to see reindeer picking their way through stands of birch, to hear streams where there was once only silence. It's proof that the earth is above all else dynamic. It has always been capable of reinvention, but the speed of this reinvention is dizzy. Where the Eocene warmth unfolded over hundreds of thousands of years, this change is happening in mere decades. In geological terms, it's the blink of an eye. The ice, which once took ages to build, can vanish faster than the span of a human lifetime. The numbers are humbling. The Greenland ice sheet loses over 250 billion tons of ice each year. Antarctica sheds even more, some years as much as 400 billion tons. Combined, that's enough water to raise global sea levels by about a millimeter annually. It doesn't sound like much, but like a slow heartbeat it adds up. A century of melting becomes a meter of ocean rise. 2 centuries, 2 meters. The process accelerates as the ice thins and weakens, the oceans swell, their warmth rising, gnawing at the ice shelves from below, while the sun softens them from above. Meanwhile, the Arctic Ocean, once capped by a floating lid of sea ice, is opening up. Each summer, the ice cover retreats farther than before. Satellite images show a patchwork of open water where solid ice used to stretch unbroken to the horizon. The age of the permanent ice cap may already be over. Within a few decades, scientists predict that the Arctic could be nearly ice-free in summer, a blue ocean reflecting heat instead of white ice reflecting light. It's a quiet but profound transformation, the kind that changes not just the landscape but the balance of the planet's entire climate engine. And yet, for all its seriousness, there's something oddly graceful about the way ice dies. It doesn't rage, it reshapes, it fractures, it drifts, it liquefies, it finds new forms. The same molecules that once locked sunlight out of the ocean now shimmer as waves. Water, after all, is patient. It doesn't vanish, it merely moves. The glaciers that carved valleys are returning to the sea, completing a cycle they began long before we arrived to watch. If the Earth has a sense of humor, and sometimes it feels as though it does, it's in the irony that melting ice creates both loss and renewal. Rivers born from glaciers carry minerals to the sea, feeding plankton, feeding fish. The same meltwater that erases ice gives life elsewhere. But the balance is fragile. The ice sheets act as stabilizers in Earth's climate system, keeping ocean currents and weather patterns in check. As they melt, they release not only water but influence. The more the ice retreats, the more the planet shifts toward a state it hasn't known in tens of millions of years. Greenland's meltwater, for example, pours into the North Atlantic, freshening the salty ocean and altering its circulation. The feedbacks are complex, intertwined, and deeply global. The cryosphere, our frozen world, is not just a feature of the planet, it is one of its vital organs. Scientists who study ice often describe their work with reverence, almost as though they're listening to an ancient language. Each core drilled from Greenland or Antarctica is a time capsule, preserving the whispers of past climates in layers of frozen air, the bubbles trapped within the ice record, the composition of the atmosphere going back hundreds of thousands of years. When researchers melt and analyze them, they are literally hearing Earth's breath from another age. And now, those ancient breaths are being released again, not in laboratories but into the open air, as the ice that held them crumbles. In the Arctic night, when the sky burns with auroras and the stars shimmer above the snow, it's hard to imagine that this stillness is temporary. The ice seems eternal, the way mountains seem eternal. But deep within it, the cracks are spreading, and the warmth seeps upward from the sea. The colors of the aurora ripple over a land that is changing, even as we watch. It's beautiful, and it's fragile, and it's fleeting. Somewhere in Greenland right now, a block of ice the size of a house is splitting from a glacier's edge and crashing into the sea. The sound is like thunder, a sharp report that echoes for miles. It's a reminder that even the slowest forces of nature can make themselves heard. The waves it sends out ripple across the fjord, small but insistent, moving outward until they merge with the larger rhythm of the ocean. That's the truth of it. Every fragment, every droplet, every quiet melt joins something bigger. The poles are still white. For now, the glaciers still gleam in the morning light. The ice sheets still sprawl across their ancient beds. But they are thinning, their edges are dissolving, and beneath the surface, beneath our feet, beneath even the air, the change has already begun. The Eocene warmth is returning, not as a memory, but as a reality replayed at unprecedented speed. Forests reach north, rivers run free, and the permafrost exhales. The earth once again is shifting its wardrobe, from ice to green, from frost to flow. Perhaps the planet whispers to its ice as it melts, something gentle and inevitable. Thank you for your time. You've done your part. Because that's what the ice has always done. Cool the world when it's too hot. Store the sea when it's too full. Reflect the sun when it's too bright. It has been Earth's mirror, its memory, and its pause button. And now that mirror is cracking. But even as the white fades, there's still beauty in it. The meltwater rivers glint like silver threads, winding their way through canyons of ice. The glaciers glow blue from within, lit by the low polar sun. And as the ice recedes, new land emerges, bare rock, ancient soil, and the promise of whatever comes next. The transformation is unsettling, yes, but it's also awe-inspiring. It reminds us that we live on a restless world, one that never stops moving between extremes. The fragility of ice is not its weakness, it's its truth. Ice is the planet's way of remembering and forgetting at the same time. It records the past and then releases it. It freezes and it melts. It holds and it lets go. In that cycle lies both the melancholy of loss and the quiet miracle of renewal. So the next time you see a photo of a glacier carving into the sea or an iceberg drifting into the open ocean, try not to think only of what's being lost. Think too of what it means to witness such a moment in Earth's long, shimmering story. A moment when the planet once again changes its skin. The ice may be fragile, but the world beneath it endures. And somewhere in that vast conversation between water and time, the Earth is whispering softly, almost playfully, "Goodbye, ice. It's been lovely. Don't forget to write." The human consequence: a world without ice. Imagine waking up one morning and finding the map of Earth completely redrawn. The shorelines have moved inland, the continents look thinner, and the great coastal cities, the jewels of human civilization, have vanished beneath a glittering, endless sea. It's not the plot of a science fiction film. It's what the world would look like if the ice that still caps Greenland and Antarctica finally melted away. No asteroids, no volcanic cataclysm, just water, slow and patient, reclaiming what it once owned. If all the ice on Earth were to melt, global sea levels would rise by more than 60 meters, enough to redraw every coastline on the planet. It wouldn't happen overnight, of course, but if we imagine the end point, the world after the melt, we get a glimpse into a future that is both mesmerizing and unsettling. Humanity, the land-dwelling species that it is, would have to adapt to a planet that looks more like an archipelago than a set of continents. The numbers are almost surreal. More than 1/3 of the global population, over 2.5 billion people, live within 100 kilometers of the coast. Nearly 700 million live less than 10 meters above current sea level. That means when the seas rise, it's not just a few islands that disappear, it's the beating heart of human civilization. The ports, the capitals, the megacities, all the bright, humming centers of commerce and culture, would become aquatic ruins. Picture New York City as the tide creeps in, one block at a time. The Statue of Liberty, still proud but waist-deep in water, stands as a literal beacon for boats instead of people. Manhattan becomes a cluster of small islands, Uptown Hill, Midtown Reef, and Downtown Shoal, connected by ferry rather than subway. Wall Street lies quiet under meters of seawater, its skyscrapers transformed into vertical coral towers for fish. Tourists might one day scuba dive through Times Square, watching schools of silver fish swirl around the digital billboards now dark. Across the Atlantic, London faces the same fate. The River Thames would swell into a bay, swallowing Westminster and flooding the ancient heart of the city. Big Ben would become a lighthouse, marking the entrance to the drowned remains of Parliament. The London, a half-submerged Ferris wheel turned artificial reef. The British Isles would splinter into a scatter of smaller islands, their green hills now hemmed by new watery edges. Farther east, Shanghai would vanish beneath the rising sea. The Huangpu River would merge seamlessly with the East China Sea, turning one of the world's most dynamic cities into an estuary. The skyline that once symbolized modern ambition, glass towers and neon lights, would shimmer just below the surface, visited by divers who whisper about the lost century of skyscrapers. Hong Kong, Mumbai, Bangkok, Jakarta, all would follow. The planet's economic engines are, quite literally, sitting on the shoreline of change. Even inland, the ripples would reach far. The Mekong Delta, the Nile, the Mississippi, all the great river systems that feed humanity would drown their deltas, pushing fertile farmland underwater. Egypt's breadbasket would be gone. The Mississippi basin would empty into a Gulf of Mexico that stretches deep into what is now Louisiana and Arkansas, Vietnam's rice fields, Bangladesh's plains, gone beneath brackish tides. It's as though the earth, having lent us her coasts for a brief moment, has decided to take them back, and yet life would continue. Humans are nothing if not adaptable. History shows that when the environment shifts, people move, but never before would we have to move on this scale. Billions would become migrants, not from war or politics, but from the slow, steady advance of water. Coastal populations would retreat inland, seeking higher ground. Mountain valleys would become crowded with new settlements. The great migration of the future might not be towards cities, but away from them. Imagine a future map of migration from Dhaka to Delhi, from Lagos to the highlands of Cameroon, from Miami to Atlanta, from Shanghai to the plateaus of western China. Nations as we know them would blur. Borders, after all, are written on land, and land in this new world is negotiable. Floodplains that once marked the edges of countries would be underwater. Political maps would need redrawing as refugees and governments jostle for space. The 21st century's most valuable real estate might not be coastal penthouses, but highland plateaus and mountain basins. The world's geography would no longer match its history. Venice, that eternal city of water, would become the blueprint for survival. Humans would build floating towns, anchored cities, and hybrid landscapes that rise and fall with the tides. Technology would adapt quickly. Homes on stilts, vertical farming towers, entire transportation networks running on canals. Perhaps New Orleans and Amsterdam, long veterans of battling the sea, would offer lessons in endurance. Humanity might even learn to live not just beside the ocean, but on it. But there's a certain melancholy to it. 2. Think of the heritage we'd lose. The pyramids of Giza, the ruins of Alexandria, the palaces of Bangkok, the marketplaces of Mumbai, all submerged beneath silt and salt. The Louvre would stand in shallow waters, its glass pyramid a gleaming relic beneath the waves. The Sydney Opera House would become an underwater concert hall for whales. It's an odd kind of immortality, our monuments preserved not by time but by tide. Still, humor has a way of sneaking into even the most serious scenarios. If New York becomes Venice, perhaps gondolas will replace taxis. Londoners might take up paddleboarding to work. Climate-themed vacation packages could offer scuba tours of ancient cities, explore the lost towers of Shanghai, fish included. The human instinct to adapt and even to laugh has always been our saving grace. Of course, it's not just the cities that would change. Agriculture, the quiet engine of civilization, would have to reinvent itself. The great coastal farmlands, where fertile soil meets freshwater rivers, would be the first to go. Salt water would seep inland, poisoning crops and turning plains into marshes. In some regions, farmers might move uphill. In others, they might move north. The global breadbaskets, California's Central Valley, the Nile Delta, the North China Plain, would shrink, forcing food systems to reorganize. Wheat fields might migrate into what is now tundra. Vineyards could climb into the Alps. The Arctic Circle, once a frozen wilderness, might become the world's new farmland. With the melting of ice, entire ecosystems would shift their boundaries. Boreal forests would creep north, replacing tundra. Polar bears, unable to find ice to hunt from, might vanish or evolve into something new. Whales would swim farther inland as estuaries. Wide coral reefs might bloom in places that once knew only cold currents. In the long arc of time, life would adapt, But for humans, adaptation comes with logistics, with politics, with price tags. Economically, the losses would be staggering. Ports would vanish, fisheries would move, and infrastructure built over centuries would sink beneath the sea. But humans, clever creatures that we are, might find opportunity in the chaos. Coastal engineering would become a defining art form, equal parts science and survival. Floating farms, amphibious vehicles, and artificial archipelagos might not be fiction but necessity. Already, architects dream of ocean cities, modular, mobile, self-sustaining. In a world without ice, those dreams might become blueprints. And what of culture? The very idea of nation might dissolve along with the shorelines. If one country's land disappears, does its identity go with it? Or does it simply float elsewhere? A people in search of source. Perhaps we'd see the rise of nomadic nations, communities that move across the seas, untethered to geography. The passport of the future might not bear a country's name, but of fleets, citizens of the Oceanic Union, perhaps, sailing from port to port on a restless, borderless planet. The world's map, so carefully drawn, would blur. Old rivalries might fade in the face of shared survival, or new ones might emerge as inland nations become coastal and highlands turn into coveted havens. Geography, once a quiet backdrop to history, would become its author again, and through it all the sea would rise, not with fury, but with inevitability. In some sense, a world without ice would be a return to an older Earth, a reminder that the frozen poles we know are not the planet's default state. For most of its 4.5 billion years, Earth has been warmer, wetter, and less sharply divided between land and sea. But never before have humans had to live through such a transformation. Our species has built its civilizations on the stability of coastlines, on predictable climates, on the illusion of permanence. In a world without ice, that illusion dissolves. The new reality is fluid, literally. Still, perhaps there's something poetic in the idea. We began our journey as wanderers, following rivers, chasing herds, living at the mercy of the tides. Maybe, after all this time, we'll return to that nomadic spirit, except now our rivers will be seas, and our herds will be ships. Humanity has always been a species of improvisers. Faced with rising water, we'll build higher, float farther, and learn new ways to belong. Picture it, floating cities shimmering under a warmer sun, gardens grown on decks, powered by wind and tide, children learning geography, not from textbooks, but from the sight of moving horizons. The Earth once again reshaping us in her image, not a planet of fixed borders, but of endless motion. And if you listen carefully, you might even hear her whispering through the waves, not in anger, but in wry amusement. Move along, little species. The shore's not where it used to be. The world without ice would be vast, beautiful and strange. A planet of new beginnings written on a shifting sea. It would test us, yes, but it would also remind us that adaptation is our oldest story. We've crossed deserts, climbed mountains, outlived glaciers before. We'll do it again. Perhaps in this warmer, wetter world, humanity will rediscover its humility, remembering that our cities may rise and fall, but life, like water, always finds its level. So when the tides come and the coastlines fade and the maps have to be redrawn, maybe the Earth will murmur one last joke, the kind only an ancient planet could make. Don't worry, I've had this look before. You'll get used to it. Just bring a boat. Geological time, a lesson in humility. If you could stand on a mountain and watch time itself like waves rolling across a shore, you would see that everything we call history barely ripples the surface. The rise and fall of civilizations, the inventions, the wars, the songs, all of them flicker in an instant, compared to the deep breathing of the Earth. Geological time doesn't tick, it exhales. Millions of years pass like seconds. Continents drift, mountains rise, oceans vanish, and ice comes and goes in cycles too vast for the human mind to truly grasp. Against that canvas, humanity isn't even a brushstroke. We are at most the glint of sunlight on wet paint, beautiful, brief, and soon gone. To understand Earth, you have to learn to think slowly. Not in years or centuries, but in epochs and eons. The Cryogenian, for instance, an age so far back it feels almost mythical, was a time when the planet nearly froze solid. Ice covered the oceans from pole to pole, turning Earth into what scientists call a snowball. Even the equator glittered white beneath a weak sun. The continents were locked in ice sheets kilometers thick, and the atmosphere was thinner, colder, quieter. The oceans slumbered beneath their icy shells for tens of millions of years. Yet somehow life endured. Tiny microorganisms survived in pockets of liquid water beneath the ice, clinging to hydrothermal vents, waiting patiently for the world to thaw. And thaw it did. Slowly, inevitably, the balance shifted. Volcanoes belched carbon dioxide into the air, building up a planetary greenhouse over millions of years. The ice melted, sunlight returned, and the planet swung from one extreme to another. From frozen tomb to tropical cradle, Earth transformed. It was not the first time, nor the last. In this slow pendulum of climate and chaos, the planet has been every version of itself. Snowball, swamp, furnace, and forest. Consider the Cretaceous, some 90 million years ago, the opposite of the Cryogenian. No ice, no frost, just warmth spilling from the equator to the poles. The world was lush, humid, alive with creatures whose size defied reason. Forests grew in the Arctic Circle, dinosaurs walked under midnight suns, the seas flooded half the continents. And yet, for all its heat and excess, the Earth was balanced. It wasn't burning or dying, it was thriving in a different key. The climate was another rhythm, in a long, slow symphony. Then came the Eocene 50 million years ago, a gentler warmth, a green and misty world where crocodiles basked near the poles, and mammals, still young in their evolutionary story, flourished in tropical forests that circled the globe. For millions of years, the Earth wore a crown of cloud and green, its temperature steady, its seas high, its life abundant. And then, as always, it changed again. Ice returned, mountains rose, currents shifted. The balance tipped, and the pendulum swung back toward cold. It is tempting to call these changes disasters, but to Earth, they are just moods. The Cryogenian was a deep breath in, the Cretaceous a slow exhale. The planet has seen more transformations than we can name, and through them all, it has persisted, not as a fragile system on the brink, but as a vast, self-adjusting engine of renewal. Life, too, is stubborn. It shrinks, adapts, radiates, and starts again. After every crash comes a bloom, after every freeze, a thaw. The history of Earth is not a straight line of progress, but a heartbeat, steady, slow, and alive. When you compress 4.5 billion years into a single human day, something extraordinary happens to your sense of importance. The dinosaurs ruled for the equivalent of an hour before fading away. The ice ages come and go in minutes, and humanity, our entire written history, from cave art to quantum computing, fits comfortably into the final half-second before midnight. The pyramids were built in the blink of an eye. Shakespeare's pen flicked in the last flicker of twilight. The internet, a spark that hasn't even had time to fade. The irony is that we humans often speak as though we're the main event. We name the epochs after ourselves, the Anthropocene, the Age of Man, as if the planet needed a reminder of our presence. But the Earth has hosted billions of species, each of which once thought it was the center of everything. Trilobites had their reign of seas, ammonites their spiral empires. The forests of the Carboniferous covered the world in oxygen-rich jungles long before a mammal ever blinked. Even the dinosaurs, with their 60 million years of dominance, were just one chapter. Against that backdrop, our tenure so far doesn't even fill a page. It's humbling, really, to realize how small our story is in the grand ledger of time. But humility doesn't mean despair. If anything, it's freeing. The Earth is not fragile in the way we often imagine. It has survived asteroid impacts, volcanic winters, mass extinctions, and global freezes. It has been scorched, flooded, cracked, and frozen solid, and each time it has found equilibrium again. What breaks are not planets, but patterns. Life reorganizes itself, the biosphere resets, and time moves on. Geological time has no hurry. 1,000,000 years is a lazy afternoon. 100 million years is the slow turn of a page. To us, such scales feel impossible. We measure change by human lifetimes, not tectonic ones. Yet beneath our feet, the continents still drift, a few centimeters per year, steadily as a heartbeat. Mountains still rise and crumble, oceans open and close. Every grain of sand was once part of a mountain, every drop of seawater once a vapor in the sky. The earth recycles everything, even its moods. It's strange to think that the same planet that once froze itself solid now carries lush forests and cities buzzing with electricity. Stranger still that both extremes, the frozen and the fertile, fit naturally into the same story. The Cryogenian, the Cretaceous, the Eocene, these aren't isolated chapters, but verses in a poem that's been recited for eons. The poem's theme is change, the refrain is resilience, and yet, when you zoom out far enough, even the wildest shifts seem gentle. The continents drift like slow dancers, sometimes colliding, sometimes parting. The oceans swell and retreat. Ice caps grow and melt in long, slow rhythms, like the breathing of some vast organism. The planet isn't fragile. It's patient. It has time, so much time, that even its catastrophes are just punctuation marks. Humans, by contrast, live at lightning speed. Our histories are written in decades, our empires in centuries. We are creatures of urgency, constantly chasing what's next. To us, the Earth's tempo feels glacial, literally, but perhaps the lesson of geological time is that patience is not slowness, it's depth. The Earth moves not in haste, but with intention. It doesn't panic when it freezes or flares. It simply adjusts its orbit, its chemistry, its breath. When you think of it that way, the idea of permanence becomes laughable. The Himalayas, the Rockies, the Andes, all of them are temporary, just wrinkles in the crust that will one day erode away. The Sahara, now a desert, was once a sea. Antarctic, now buried in ice, was once a rainforest. Even the sky has changed. The oxygen we breathe is the byproduct of ancient algae that billions of years ago poisoned the atmosphere for the earlier inhabitants of Earth. Everything changes, everything adapts, and somehow in all that flux, life keeps finding a way to persist. It's almost comedic to imagine Earth's personality across time. During the Cryogenian, she was moody and cold. "I just need some space," she might have said, wrapping herself in ice. During the Cretaceous, she swung the other way. "Is it hot in here, or is it just me?" Through it all, the planet's voice, if it could speak, would carry the same calm amusement. "Relax, I've done this before." That's the humbling truth of geological time. The Earth doesn't panic, because it remembers. It has a memory longer than mountains and deeper than oceans. When the ice comes, it waits. When the heat returns, it breathes. Every so often it starts over. To the planet, 100 million years is not an eternity. It's a rhythm. Standing against that rhythm, humanity is tiny, but luminous. We are the brief flare of awareness within a timeline that otherwise doesn't care to be seen. For billions of years, the Earth spun without witnesses. Now for a moment it has eyes. Perhaps that's our role, not to control the planet, but to notice it, to marvel at the strata, the fossils, the shifting stars, to remember that we are made of the same minerals and waters that once moved through those ancient worlds. When you touch a rock, you're touching deep time. That grain of quartz beneath your hand might have been part of a mountain before mammals existed. That limestone cliff was once a coral reef beneath a warm Cretaceous sea. Even the soil you walk on carries the memory of glaciers that ground stone to dust. Time is everywhere, layered and quiet, waiting to be noticed. It's worth pausing once in a while to feel that scale, to imagine all the worlds Earth has been: frozen orb, swampy cradle, fiery desert, green paradise. To recognize that it has changed utterly and yet always found its balance. The lesson isn't that change is bad, it's that change is inevitable. What endures is not form, but transformation. So perhaps humility is the only reasonable response to living on such a planet. Not despair, not pride, but wonder. To accept that our story is small, and that's okay. To remember that we are guests, not owners, on a world that has hosted countless lives before us and will host countless more after. If you could hear Earth whisper through its rocks and ice, perhaps it would say something like this: I have been colder than you can imagine, and hotter than you can bear. I have worn white and green and black and blue. I have frozen, burned, drowned, and bloomed, and I am still here. You little ones are new. But don't worry, everything changes, everything returns. In that whisper lies the most comforting and humbling truth of all. The earth doesn't need saving, but it invites understanding. It asks only that we listen to the ice, the stone, the slow pulse of time beneath our feet. So when the mountains crumble and the oceans rise, when climates shift and landscapes turn over, don't mistake it for the end. It's only another breath in the long life of a restless planet. And somewhere in that deep geological silence, the earth might chuckle softly and murmur, half kindly, half amused, breathe, little species. I've seen worse. I've been worse. I'll be fine. The future, what will Earth become? If you could peer ahead, past the haze of years and centuries, past the shifting maps and rising seas, what kind of Earth would you see? Not the static, fragile planet of postcards and school maps, but a living, evolving world, a world still breathing, still changing, still experimenting. The question isn't whether Earth will survive, it's what shape it will take next, and how well we, its quick-footed tenants, can dance to its changing rhythm. The most likely answer, whispered by science and echoed by geology, is that Earth may once again resemble the Eocene, a lush, warm, almost tropical planet draped in green from equator to pole. Forests could return to the far north. Crocodiles could once again swim where icebergs once drifted, and the polar regions might bloom with vegetation under endless sunlight. The difference is not the destination, but the speed. In the Eocene, warmth unfolded over millions of years. Today, it's accelerating within mere centuries. The Earth can adapt. The question is, can we? Already, we can see the outlines of that possible world forming. Temperatures are rising, seas are expanding, and ecosystems are shifting their borders as if adjusting their chairs in a crowded room. The Arctic grows greener each year. Species migrate northward, chasing the climate zones that once defined their homes. Coral reefs, sensitive sentinels of temperature, are fading in the tropics and sprouting in new places. Insects arrive earlier in the spring. Flowers bloom sooner. The Earth is in motion, not through catastrophe, but through momentum. If the warming continues, the planet could settle into a state resembling that Eocene paradise. No polar ice, higher seas, subtropical climates extending toward the poles. The great belts of vegetation would shift, deserts expanding in some regions, jungles in others. Rainfall patterns would rewrite themselves and the familiar shapes of coastlines would blur. But this is not necessarily a picture of doom, it's a picture of transformation. Life, as it always has, will adapt. The trick is ensuring that we short-lived, inventive, occasionally panicky humans adapt with it. Let's imagine that world for a moment. The poles are no longer white, but green and gold. Forests rise where tundra once lay, and rivers flow freely across continents without freezing. The oceans, warmed and expanded, cradle new coral reefs in northern waters. The equatorial zones shimmer with storms intense, frequent, but rich with rain. The air feels thick, lush, alive. To some species it's heaven, to others an eviction notice. Human civilization, of course, would have had to shift along with it. The coastlines we know would be gone, but new ones would form. The global map would redraw itself, with inland plains becoming new agricultural heartlands, and today's deserts perhaps blooming again under altered rainfall. Cities might move, rise, or even float. Our descendants may live in places we now call inhospitable, using technologies that mimic the resilience of ecosystems. Cities that grow food on their rooftops, that generate power from tides, that breathe with the weather instead of resisting it. In this imagined Eocene 2.0, adaptation becomes our art form. Agriculture will follow the warmth, just as forests and animals do. We might grow vineyards in Greenland, wheat in Siberia, rice in the Canadian plains. The new climate zones won't erase life. They'll rearrange it. The challenge isn't that the planet will become uninhabitable. It's that it will become unfamiliar. And humans, for all our genius, have never liked being surprised by the weather. Still, we're good at learning. We've crossed ice ages before. Well, our ancestors did, barefoot and clever, with fire and grit. We've built floating cities in swamps and carved homes into mountains. We've thrived in deserts, jungles, and tundras. If Earth decides to turn up the thermostat again, there's every reason to believe we can learn to live comfortably in the heat, so long as we act wisely, not hastily. Science, in its calm way, gives us both the warning and the hope. The warming we see now is measurable, traceable, predictable in many ways. The more carbon in the air, the more heat in the system. The more heat, the more ice melts. The more ice melts, the more sunlight the Earth absorbs, and so on. But this isn't fate, it's feedback. Feedback can be slowed, diverted, balanced. Humanity, unlike any species before, has both the awareness and the tools to adjust the system we live in. We are not just passengers on this planet, we are part of its steering mechanism. To thrive in the future, we will need to think not in decades, but in patterns. Like the Earth itself, we can reimagine agriculture to work with shifting climates instead of against them. We can rebuild cities as flexible organisms that move and breathe with rising seas. We can protect the forests and wetlands that regulate temperature naturally, allowing the planet's own systems to keep doing their quiet, miraculous work. We can learn to see stability not as stasis, but as motion and balance, like a dancer who keeps her footing by moving gracefully with the rhythm. There's humor in this too, if you squint a little. Earth isn't angry, it's just being itself. It warms, it cools, it drifts. It has done so long before we arrived and will do so long after. The only thing truly new about the coming changes is the presence of 7 billion talkative, creative mammals watching it happen in real time. The planet doesn't hold grudges, it simply follows its physics. When it gets warmer, oceans swell, clouds gather, plants grow faster, and deserts shift. If Earth could speak, it might tease us gently. You built your cities right on my edges. What did you expect? In a way, this next transformation could be seen as an invitation rather than a punishment. It invites us to think on a planetary scale, to stop seeing ourselves as separate from nature, and instead as participants in it. The warmth we feel is not an alien force pressing in from above. It's the Earth's own energy, its long, slow pulse, amplified by our touch. And if we listen, if we learn to read its signals instead of ignoring them, we can live not against the planet's tide, but with it. Imagine the technologies that will emerge from this adaptation: floating solar farms that drift on the expanding seas, cities that recycle every drop of rain, houses that grow like plants, adjusting to light and temperature, vertical gardens climbing the sides of towers, roads that charge electric vehicles as they drive. The boundary between city and ecosystem could blur until human habitats become just another layer of Earth's living skin. Of course, there will be challenges, many of them. Rising seas will displace millions, droughts will test our food systems, and storms will redraw coastlines. But these challenges are not the end of the story, they're the middle. We've faced global crises before, the ice ages, the plagues, the great migrations, and every time we've emerged changed but alive. Our ingenuity has always been our greatest survival mechanism, and it thrives best when reality gives us no choice. Perhaps the most profound lesson of the coming centuries will be one of humility. We will learn, as our ancestors did, that control is an illusion. The Earth cannot be frozen in a single state to suit our comfort. It moves, it breathes, it evolves. Our task is not to stop it, but to travel with it, to design lives, cities, and systems flexible enough to bend with a changing world. Like a sailor who cannot calm the sea but can learn to steer, humanity will find its course not by resisting the storm, but by reading the wind. And yes, there will be beauty in it too. The polar night glowing green under auroras reflected in new seas, forests stretching across the far north whispering in summer breezes, coral reefs blooming again in Arctic waters, reinventing themselves as they always have, a world more dynamic, more surprising, perhaps more alive than the one we inherited. Change, after all, is the planet's favorite art form. If the Earth truly does become an echo of the Eocene, it won't be the same one. It will be an Eocene shaped by human fingerprints, where technology and nature cohabit rather than compete. A warm world with smart, adaptable species building homes on shifting sands, planting forests where ice once ruled, and telling stories about the time when the poles were white. In that sense, the future is less a tragedy than a turning page. So where does that leave us? Somewhere between anxiety and awe. We live in a moment of extraordinary influence, with the power to tilt the balance one way or another. But even if the warmth continues, even if the world grows more humid, more fluid, more unpredictable, it won't be the end. It will be another act in a long, ongoing play, the scene where the clever primates learn that they are not the audience but part of the cast. If we are wise, we'll take our cues from Earth itself. It never stops changing, but it never gives up. When it freezes, it waits. When it burns, it breathes. When it falls silent, life finds a new way to sing. That's the story we're part of now, not a story of endings, but of adaptation, curiosity, and grace. And maybe, just maybe, the Earth will look at us, not as intruders, but as collaborators in its next great transformation. It might raise an amused eyebrow, if planets had eyebrows, and murmur, "You've seen what I can do. Now show me what you can do." So let's imagine the future not as a warning, but as an invitation to think bigger, to live more lightly, to act with the wisdom of a species that finally realizes it's sharing space with a living planet. The warmth that comes is not an enemy, but a test of creativity, compassion, and balance. And somewhere beneath the hum of satellites and the whisper of forests reborn, the Earth itself might be smiling quietly, its voice both playful and profound. "Don't worry, little ones, I've been warned before. Learn fast. You'll be fine." From the rainforest that once covered Antarctica to the crocodiles that bask beneath the Arctic sun, the story of a world without ice is not just science. It's poetry written in stone, in fossils, in the quiet persistence of time. The Earth has worn many faces, each more surprising than the last. Frozen globe, steamy greenhouse, trembling newborn, and patient elder. Across eons it has shifted, breathed, burned, and healed, teaching in its own unhurried language that change is not chaos, it is life itself. If there is one lesson that threads through this long, warm tapestry, it is humility. For all our noise and cleverness, we are late arrivals to a world that has been spinning its slow, creative dance for 4.5 billion years. The forests, the oceans, the mountains, they were here long before we spoke their names, and they will remain long after our brief story ends. The planet is older than memory and wiser than our certainty. It reminds us, softly but persistently, that we are part of something vast and continuous, a breathing planet that does not rush, does not panic, but endure. Imagine for a moment that you are standing at the edge of that ancient world. No cities, no machines, just air thick with warmth and the murmur of unseen creatures. The poles are green, filled with the rustle of ferns and the hum of insects. Rivers curl through forests of giant trees, their roots glistening in soft rain. Somewhere, a distant thundercloud rolls, not in warning but in rhythm, keeping time with the heartbeat of the earth. There is no ice, there is no urgency, only the endless patience of nature, doing what it has always done, transforming, balancing, beginning again. The Earth's legacy is not one of fragility, but of resilience. It has frozen solid and thawed back to life. It has burned beneath volcanoes and cooled into calm oceans. It has seen continents drift apart and rejoin like slow lovers. Every scar in its crust, every fossil in its rock, every molecule of air is part of a conversation millions of years long, and we, brief and bright, are lucky enough to have arrived during one of its gentlest verses. A pause between extremes when the climate breathes evenly and the seasons turn with grace. That balance is not ours to command, but it is ours to honor, to protect the forests that still whisper the memory of ancient rain, the oceans that hold the DNA of all beginnings, the ice that glows like glass above the poles. We are stewards not of permanence, but of continuity. Our task is not to freeze the planet in place, but to let it live freely while keeping our place within its rhythm, a partnership of humility, not control. When you step outside and feel the wind, you are touching the same air that once brushed the leaves of Antarctic jungles. When you look at the stars, you are seeing the same sky that once glowed above Arctic crocodiles. The past isn't gone. It lingers quietly, folded into the soil, the seas, and even your breath. Every inhale carries the memory of a planet that has remade itself 1,000 times and will do so again. Perhaps that's what makes Earth so extraordinary. Not that it has survived, but that it has done so beautifully. It creates and destroys, warms and cools, all without bitterness. It doesn't cling to what was, it simply becomes what is needed next. And in that patient evolution lies a kind of peace, a reminder that even endings can be beginnings, and that the truest stability lies in motion. If you listen closely, beneath the hum of the modern world, you can still hear the planet's slower rhythm. It hums through the rustle of trees, the lap of water against shore, the distant hiss of rain. It says, I have been many things. I will be many more. You are part of my story, but not the whole. And what a story it is, an unbroken saga of transformation, written across oceans and mountains, told in the language of light and time. From the first breath of cyanobacteria to the whisper of wind through forests, from the warmth of the Cretaceous seas to the stillness of polar ice, Earth's legacy is one of resilience wrapped in grace. It asks only that we listen, that we move gently, and that we remember how small we are in the scale of things, and how lucky too. So as we close this journey, let your mind drift not to fear or regret, but to wonder. Picture the poles again, not white and barren, but alive, forests of green leaves shimmering in golden light, rivers winding lazily beneath a sky of endless daylight. The air is warm, the world unhurried. Somewhere, a bird calls and the sound fades into the rustle of leaves. Everything is still. Everything is in motion. The earth doesn't need to be perfect for it to be beautiful. It never was. Its beauty lies in its change, in the way each age leaves behind traces for the next, in the way life persists, adapts and finds balance anew. Our place in that beauty is not to conquer or correct, but to notice, to care, to tread lightly. So tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine that quiet polar forest. The air is soft, the light never fades completely. The leaves sway like slow waves, and the earth hums beneath your feet, ancient and content. You are part of that hum, brief, bright, and beloved. If you feel small, that's good. It means you understand. The planet is vast, and you are a moment within it. But even a moment can be full of meaning. Even a breath can be an act of connection. From the rainforests of the South Pole to the crocodile rivers of the North, from the first warmth to the quiet now, Earth's story is still being written, and you are here to witness a line of it. What a gift, to live on such a patient world. So take a deep breath. Let the thoughts settle like mist. The planet is turning, the forests are breathing, the seas are sleeping, and somewhere beneath it all, the earth is whispering, gently and amused, rest now. I've got this. Sweet dreams, traveller, and may your sleep be as calm as an ancient polar forest, where leaves rustle softly under an eternal sun.